New NDC administration is resolutely committed to strengthening our justice system to ensure judicial independence and address the systemic inequalities that currently exist. I can assure you that this administration will work tirelessly to ensure that every Ghanaian, regardless of your status or background, is treated with dignity and afforded equal protection under the law.
By voting as you did on December 7th, the Ghanaian people conveyed a powerful message, yet often overlooked by us politicians. This message was powerfully emphasized by a giant of American political history, President Ronald Reagan, when he declared at his inauguration some 40 years ago that governments have no power except that granted by the people. While Ghanaians take great pride in our thriving democracy, they are deeply dissatisfied with the quality of governance over the years and have openly voiced that dissatisfaction through the decisive actions that they undertake at the elections. Our people also understand that democracy is not just a token adorned with periodic elections followed by pomp and pageantry with the establishment of a new government. They expect that if democracy is celebrated as a superior means of governance, then its outcomes must be more tangible and benefit them in their individual lives. Any honest introspection and reflection on the pulse of our nation would reveal that many within our population do not feel that they have benefited from or partaking in this democratic dividend. Where people buffeted by severe economic crisis and hardships, and in the last few years, we have lurched from crisis to crisis. But there is hope on the horizon. Of my fellow countrymen and women who joined long queues and waited in the sun for their turn to vote for me, you have my sincerest thanks for honoring me. My firm, immutable assurance is that your votes will matter in the work that I'll do to make a difference in the destiny of this dear nation of ours. Your courage to bring change will not go in vain. Our nation was born with much promise. That promise would seem hazy and in doubt now because of all that has happened in the past. But I urge you, my fellow countrymen, not to be sucked into a state of perpetual pessimism. For some time, our country has urgently needed leadership with an unwavering desire to get things done. I, with all humility, assent that I intend to be that leader with your cooperation and your help. As your next leader, I shall strive to exercise sound judgment and be able to make the right calls at the right time. I will have the humility and presence of mind to take responsibility for any challenges and be willing to act firmly and timeously to resolve the challenges that we face as a nation. Since the elections, I have read and heard the word hope used many times in relation to my presidency and what it should offer the citizens of Ghana. I intend to speak plainly and clearly to you today, and every time I address you subsequently, I intend to always tell you the truth. I'll be decisive and swift in my actions. We'll focus our initial efforts on 4 critical areas. The first is economic restoration and stabilization of the macroeconomic environment. The second is the improvement of the business and investment environment to ensure that Ghana is once again open for business. The third is governance and constitutional reforms. And the final, but not the least, is accountability and the fight against corruption.
And this must have been the inauguration that attracted the largest number of leaders from elsewhere, particularly in Africa, in attendance. Bola Tinubu, Paul Kagame, William Ruto, Julius Maada Bio, Goodluck Jonathan, former president of Nigeria. There were as many as 21 of such leaders, about 24 envoys, and the list was tall. So let's begin. He was sworn in Parliament. Parliament was sitting in the public. And the dawn, before he was sworn in, Alban Bagwin was also sworn in, and 2 deputy speakers of Parliament. There has been criticism that the president issued a statement mandating the NDC majority to vote or nominate Alban Bagwin as the speaker, and that some professors say this is not good for the democracy. Parliament is supposed to be a check on the executive and is supposed to be seen to act independently. So, what do we say about all that? I guess in the studio, Joyce Bar-Mukhtari is a lawyer and special aide and spokesperson, the John Mahama 2024. We are very grateful to you that you make the time to join us the second time. But by her is Professor Kofi Abochi, Dean, UPSA Law School, and Managing Partner, Axis Legal Solicitors. Then we have Hajia Rabi Salifu, who is a National Deputy Communications Director of the New Patriotic Party. Joining us via Zoom, Professor Kweku Asare, Fellow, CDD Ghana, and D&D Fellow for Public Law and Justice. Oliver Bakavomo, Constitutional Rights and Policy Strategy Advisor of the Democracy Hub. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for making the time to join us on Newsfile this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. So let me begin with Rabi. What did you make of how Parliament eventually got composed and the criticisms of what appeared to be the president's intrusion overtly, right? Mm-hmm. All right, into the process?
Thank you very much, Samson. And then I wish to say a very big thank you to you, your producers, and all team members here. And also a very good morning to my big sister and a very supportive person, Hajia Fatima Abubakar. I am a very religious follower of your program, Newsfile.
Thank you. You are in good company. Very illustrious.
Very religious, of course. And then last week was my all-time favorite because of the paneling you did here. I was home and I watched from beginning to the end, and I had to even have a replay on that. And then it was really nice, so I want to commend you for the good work you're doing.
Thank you.
And also all women who are actually making inclusivity very useful in the country.
Now we have it at the very top.
We do,
Vice
yes,
President.
we do. And then by that, I want to congratulate my sister here in the studio. At some point, I was asking myself if TikTok had signed a contract with her to be very visible on it. Yeah?
It's a buzz. Everybody loves her.
That's fine. So we actually all, both political parties,
Right.
went strongly prepared. However, Ghanaians said yes. Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, Your Excellency, we do appreciate what you are telling us. We have gone through your policy proposal. However, we want you to go and rest for a while and come back. Then to the NDC, they said yes.
Interesting way to put it.
They said yes. We have looked at yours too. You were here. We said no by your actions and inactions. This time round, we want to try you again. So the biggest lesson here is, I am very proud of Ghanaians that if you don't watch your posturing, if you don't pay so much attention to what the masses are saying, and if you don't calm down to their level, they certainly will show you the exit. So from His Excellency Dr. Alhaji Mahmoud
For example,
Bawumia,
if we say investigate the 2020, killings at the elections, and you completely ignore us, death.
But that is not also to
punish
say they weren't massive achievements by the government.
That's fine.
I think Ghanaians expected a sweet
We're going
balance.
to the inaugurations now.
Sure. Ghanaians expected a sweet balance where we could have, yes, you are doing so well. Over 12,000 or about 12,000 kilometers of roads, the ambulance services, the free SHS, among others, we do appreciate, but they expected what you are talking about. So they said, yes, NDC come again. And I want to say a very big congratulations.
Someone will say rather that the Ghanaians were saying, sorry, we regret our last decision. So John Mahama, come back. That's what they said.
Discretion on opinions. You can say.
Do you fault the president for mandating the members of parliament, the NDC supermajority, whether you like it or not,
I wouldn't,
to vote the speaker?
Not entirely, because I respect dialogue and consultation. And I think it's always the way to go for every leader. Just like you were saying, some people realized there were issues that the president, the former president, His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, should have opened up, or they expected a broader consultation. That didn't happen amongst, or with that had to do with the e-levy specifically, the issue of Cecilia Dapa and other things. People expected that, look, Mr. President would come, especially on e-levy, that is now a very big topical issue in this country, that, look, let's do this. Although he did his level of consultation much broader, but people expected more. Same applied to what happened in Parliament and the directives the current president, His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, did. So for me, yes, I'm for the people who think, yes, there should have been a much broader consultation. The parliamentarians should have been allowed to say, this is the person we want to lead us.
Yes, but the statement was issued on the back of consultations with these people.
I doubt if it was broadly done. I don't know. I haven't really dug deep into that, but I'm not too sure it was that broad, because if you have people talking...
None has complained.
People are complaining.
No, I mean the MPs whose job it was.
They probably wouldn't complain.
The election of the speaker.
They probably wouldn't complain overtly or overtedly, but don't be surprised some of them are talking to even some of us. Yes, some are unhappy, and it's so obvious that some are unhappy.
Okay, so that's just an opener, Professor Botched. Do you share the view of Professor Kwesi Prempeh, for example, that yes, these things may be done, covertly, but to do it so openly is damages the perceptions, even the perceptions that Parliament, which is supposed to check the executive, is unable to do that? It's almost like the president is the one appointing the speaker to check him.
Well, I'll tell you what, I am one of the few people who were the least worried about the president saying that. First of all, he wasn't president. He was still president-elect at the time he actually indicated that Parliament should consider going for.
He was president de facto.
Speaker, exactly. No, I'm just saying he was president-elect at the time.
I get that.
But I'm just saying I was one of the people who were least worried, because the reality is that presidents do lobby Parliament. It is a reality. It is a reality, and it's a reality the Constitution even endorses, that you should have checks and balances, and part of the checks is that the executive can have a certain degree of influence over Parliament. The reason why the president appoints the number of ministers he's supposed to appoint from Parliament is precisely so because he is allowed to have that level of leverage over parliamentary work. So the president deciding in some ways that he wants somebody to become the speaker is not new. Now, it's also interesting for us to understand that part of the reason why the office of the speaker has been reserved for a non-parliamentarian is so that, as it were, we have all these interplay of forces, consultative bodies, and interests, all coalescing to ensure that the one sitting there is ultimately going to help in some ways in government business. The president does not want government business to be stultified or stymied. And so he influencing or seeking to influence who becomes a speaker is a legitimate thing. He is not forcing or superimposing.
And the nominee had to issue a statement thanking him. And people said, this tells you that he has to listen to the president. So the checks and balances gone.
He is not forcing or superimposing. I think it's important for us to understand that. He is influencing the process. Is superimposition wrong? Yes, it is wrong. Is influence okay and leveraging okay? Yes, it is okay. The real difficulty we've had a history of parliamentary slumberness. You know, a situation in which Parliament is sleepy and a situation in which Parliament has been a follower instead of a leader. It is because of this history that is why people seem very worried and upset about what's happening. In reality, if Parliament has been doing its job, this wouldn't have been an issue. But because Parliament has had a history of pandering to the executive and members of Parliament raising their hands trying to attract the attention of the president for purposes of appointment. It's because of these parliamentary experiences and history that explains why people apparently are so worried that are we once again back to deja vu, a situation in which Parliament, as usual, is going to reflect the executive. But as I said, these things happen. We only have had it for the first time, seemingly, in the open. And so the question is, are we going to prefer the ostrich approach? The approach in which we know it exists, but somehow nobody talks about it, or rather, we've had a situation in which it's in the open. I would argue that perhaps this is actually an instance in which Parliament will be under some level of scrutiny and the Speaker will know that people are watching. And the reason is because the President preferred him. And the reason is because, as you indicated, he has thanked the President for that. And so people are watching. And if people are watching, then it means the Speaker has to be, careful so that he doesn't, so to speak, endorse the perception that he essentially, quote unquote, is in the books of the President. So my thinking is nothing new has happened. We've only had a situation of acknowledgement and an acknowledgement in which the public has been allowed to participate in the process of the president's preference. But in reality, this is something that has been going on all the time.
Thank you. Professor Kukwasari, what do you say? You join people like Kwesi Prempeh who say this should not be this openly done. Hello, Prof. Please unmute your mic.
Hello?
Yes, you're on.
Good morning, Samson, and also good morning to your panelists. Thanks for having me. It's been a while. Happy New Year. Of course, I do agree with my friend, Professor Prempeh. Look, I don't understand why we feel obliged to insert the president into any of our constitutional provisions. Article 95(1) is given in very clear forms. Members of Parliament shall elect the Speaker of Parliament.
The members are sponsored by parties.
Pardon?
The members are sponsored by political parties.
Yes, and the members are voted by people. It doesn't mean people should go and appoint leaders or whatever you said. It's irrelevant. Of course, they are sponsored by parties. People vote for them. But the Constitution has a way of delineating who should exercise what power. And so when it comes to the speakership, it basically says members of Parliament shall elect them. That basically excludes the parties, but it also excludes the presidency. Not just the speakership, but even the leadership of Parliament. I don't understand why political parties can sit somewhere and impose leaders on parliamentarians. If we elect parliamentarians who are not, I don't know what term to use, who are not trusted enough to appoint their own leaders, and party bosses must impose leaders on them. I think that's a huge problem. And this problem is not limited to what we are talking about. By the way, you know, I've had severe problems with the way we even think about constitutional amendments, where again it says Parliament shall have the power to amend the Constitution, and somehow we figure out a way to insert the president in there. And then while we do these insertions, we are quick to say the president has too much power. Well, who is giving the president too much power? We are the ones giving him too much power by saying, well, he can lobby, and because he can lobby, then there's nothing wrong with officially communicating that this person should be appointed speaker. There's a way of doing it, as Professor Botched was saying, by just doing it in the background. And as a citizen, he has that right to do it in the background. But we have to, rules are rules, as some people would say.
So you admit that it is impractical that the president will not be involved in the selection of the speaker?
Well, I mean, of course, you know, he's a citizen, and he can call somebody and say, well, I think this person should be the speaker. Donald Trump has been doing that. You know, the Congress, they may or they may not listen to him. But it is the prerogative of Parliament and Parliament alone to decide who the speaker is. And even if it creates the appearance of impropriety or propriety, as you may want to put it, the president should not formally communicate. It's the formal communication which is the problem here. Nobody has a problem with the speaker because he did a good job in the 8th Parliament. Nobody has a problem with the president lobbying in the background. The issue is, if we are not careful, then we create the impression that it is the president who has the power to decide who the speaker is.
All right.
And obviously, we know that can't be correct, because supposing you have a president who has fewer members in Parliament, then the president really has no choice who the speaker is going to be, because the majority in Parliament is going to elect someone other than who the president prefers. Well, that should tell us that the decision as to who the speaker should be is not the president's to make.
Okay. Thank you for your opener. And Article 95 is about the speaker, and it says, 95:1 says, there shall be a speaker of Parliament who shall be elected by the members of Parliament from among persons who are members of Parliament or who are qualified to be elected as members of Parliament. Speaker Bagwin was elected the speaker one more time, and then Bernard Ahiafo was elected the first deputy speaker, and then you had Andrew Esiama also getting the opportunity one more time to be a deputy speaker. He's the second deputy speaker. So Oliver, practically we are just playing the ostrich, isn't it? If we say don't do it, you know, openly, but do it quietly.
Really, I think. I mean, I am agreeing with the view, particularly in this instance, where a letter was issued saying, and using the word mandating members of Parliament to appoint the Speaker. I think that the bigger problem goes to even in terms of how parliamentary leadership is composed. We elect members of Parliament from 7th December, and by the 9th particularly, we know who the elected persons are. Already from that point in time, individuals elected must begin to caucus and determine who their leadership is. That leadership can embark on a conversation with their party, with their elected president, if their candidate wins, and even other stakeholders as to who they think, in a way of achieving some level of broad consensus across the board, who that person should be. That process is healthy for our democracy, and the fact that there's a lobbying process or persons may have different views should not necessarily be viewed as one and the same when a letter is issued saying that after consulting, I have mandated you to appoint. I think it diminishes the front's role
that parliamentarians ought to play in the process.
Do you suspect Apeyoma King may be right that something occasioned that public, sort of command to the MPs?
Well, to be fair and to be true, I think that the president has been elected with an overwhelming mandate, that he's not struggling to impose that mandate on his own MPs. And it shouldn't be made to seem as if that the president felt that this is the only way in which to check the members of parliament and felt the need to do that. I don't necessarily think so. I can't hazard a guess as to why the statement was issued, but I also don't want to speculate that because the president felt that he would be disrespected and that his wishes may not carry through. Far from it. The view that bargaining has been popular is not something that anybody discounts and is not in doubt per se. But there's also an issue that people have raised and have seen, which I also agree with, that the Speaker, Right Honourable Bagwin, issued a statement on official letterhead of Parliament accepting the nomination of the President. And I think that is also a bit concerning to me, that that statement will come from official letterhead of Parliament rather than an individual letter. But these are things which, again, it's only for administrative propriety that certain things are ironed out and straightened. But the conversation is healthy, I think.
Right. Okay, so now let me come here to the studio. So you, from where you said, this should never be repeated?
Yes, I think the statement should not have been issued. I think parliamentary leadership should say, we have consulted widely with the president-elect, with our party, with other stakeholders, and we have come to this view. That is fair. They should take the initiative and drive. And we must recognize it as such.
Can you imagine what will happen? What will happen to the moral authority of a president if his preference is ignored in the parliament?
So I don't think that the president's moral authority is undermined, that his preference is ignored. If we are not creating the ecosystem for a dictator. The president understands in a democracy that he may have a preference, but he may not always get his way. And I think we should normalize the feeling that presidents do not always get their way. The president already appoints the Chief Justice. There's nothing that diminishes presidential authority that they must have a preference as to, and that preference must be realized as to who the Speaker is for him to feel to be in authority. I don't share that view,
Okay, thank you. Joy, so I was intentional so that you will listen to everybody and we hear you because you speak for the president.
Well, thank you very much. And I have actually listened to all these views. These are actually views that have been widely published, and I think I've followed the conversations. And short of us being described as insensitive and probably trying too hard to disprove what people's opinions are on the matter, I think that we can just accept that it's happened already. The Right Honourable Speaker has duly accepted, and certainly we have also taken all these divergent views and opinions into consideration. But you see, I think that maybe just as a footnote to what I've heard from all the other speakers, it is also because there's also a certain history, Samson, a history of a certain disruption or disruptive outlook in Parliament. We also, what happened in the previous Parliament, for example, we saw how military officers invaded our Parliament. We watched the sort of, acrimony that actually ushered in the Bagwin era in Parliament. I believe that everybody is right in one way or the other. I also believe that a party leader, as he then was, that was just before he was actually sworn into office, also has a certain discretion, a certain latitude. And maybe just because we didn't want any unnecessary disruptions. Remember, we're also dealing with the New Patriotic Party, now suddenly in the, a micro-minority circumstance, and certainly going to be even more disrupted than they've ever been. I believe that in all sincerity, we may not have liked the approach. We may probably not all even welcome how it was done. But I also think that it lessened the tension and it brought down all the unnecessary, usual things that characterize these events. So I think that let's just take this in the very unique circumstances of what the history of Parliament has been. I heard another panelist on one of your programs even speak to the fact that they will reopen an investigation into why there was this attack on Parliament on that fateful night a few years ago. So there is a certain history. And I am convinced that on this occasion, this was done because we had considered all these circumstances of the history of what happened at the time.
Sounds reasonable, but Parliament is supposed to be a deliberative chamber. It's expected there'll be rancor. It's expected that, there'll be filibustering. All of these things must happen there. So why should anybody be concerned that there will be protracted processes in electing a speaker?
Samson, when you come into office on such a high keel, when expectations are so high, you genuinely don't want to increase any tensions that already exist. Like I said, we take all these opinions on board. I don't want to belabor that point too much, okay? And maybe if I were not looking at it from the perspective of a very personal opinion and looking at it maybe from a very professional lens, I'm sure that I'll entirely agree with some of the views that have been expressed. And so I think that it's happened already. Let's say congratulations to our members of Parliament, and whether or not it is indeed the case that the separation of powers is as clear as we all want it to be, or as the Constitution enjoins us to think. We do know that in the background, in the back rooms, these conversations take place. There's a lot of horse trading, there's a lot of negotiations, even on who becomes first deputy, who becomes second, who sits with who. There's a lot of these things. Maybe we took transparency to another level by literally just communicating that this is my viewpoint, this is where I sit, and this is what I want you to do. So maybe, yes, in the choice of words may have sounded a bit too, instructional, etc. I probably would want to just say that on this occasion, we take all these views on board. But there's one thing that we forget, that the entire citizens are probably not even literally too bothered about this.
They are.
And so maybe in future, who knows? But I believe that there's also a history to why this had to happen this way. And so we take all these views.
Thank you very much. You're still here on Newsfile. This is your most authoritative news analysis platform. And our stellar guests just had their openers on the election of the Speaker and the Deputy Speakers, the inauguration of the Parliament of the Fourth Republic, the 9th. Now, let's get to the swearing in for John Dramani Mahama and Professor J. Nana Opoku Agyeman. What were the highlights for you? Let's look at briefly. We'll go into the meat of it on the top of the hour. So, yes, Prof, start with you.
The highlights. Well, first of all, the biggest highlight is that we scaled the day. That's the biggest highlight. The fact that we continue doing this, we are normalizing it, and we're getting to a point where it's beginning to look almost normal, and people don't even realize or pay too much attention to the process.
Was anybody ever in any doubt that this will not, happen and pass smoothly?
Well, few people were in doubt, but it just may not have happened. We don't, again, perhaps 1979, how many years already? 1981, sorry. 81. How many years already? 40-something years already, but it's not in the distant past. And the point I'm making to you is it takes one military adventurer. It takes one false step, and a country suddenly will have to recalibrate itself and be careful about things. So the point I'm making is I'm grateful that we have taken it for granted, that we all know 7th of January was coming, and it was coming to pass, and it did come to pass. So the biggest highlight of the moment is that 7th of January has come to pass, and Ghana has once again stood still and stood together, and we're moving on. But beyond that, I think the other highlight laid in the president's message. I think the president's speech contains 4 key aspects of what I consider an inauguration speech should have. And I'll list them as follows. The first one is that I think an inauguration speech should mark a moment for a fresh start. The second one is that a speech should be a moment of reckoning. That where do we stand, and therefore how do we move forward? The third one is that a speech must be a statement of a vision. What is a vision? What are you selling to us? And the fourth one is that there must be a rallying cry of the charge and the work ahead of us. And I think the speech seems to have highlighted all these key things for me. So if you take the first one, the fact that it's a moment for a fresh start, I think the president, in many parts of his speech, but certainly one part I remember, kept saying that people are increasingly speaking about hope. The fact that there's a need for a fresh start. We are where we are We may have experienced all kinds of things in the last 8 years and beyond.
It's a restart, not a fresh start. Restart.
Restart.
Those are the words.
Indeed. But restart is a fresh start. Because what you're doing essentially is that you stopped something, and you are beginning it again, or you're restarting it. So it is a fresh start. That moment of freshness is good for every country. A country must go through a process in which the country begins anew, in which a country becomes refreshed, and the country re-energizes itself and moves forward. I think an inauguration speech, the whole essence of inauguration, the fact that you are starting something new, should signify or signal that moment for a new start. And I was about to say fresh start again. And I do hope, Joyce and the NDC doesn't say I'm changing the restart and the fresh start. But, the moment for something anew. So I think the speech in that sense captured that. And the president was at pains to keep highlighting and re-emphasizing that, the fact that we stand in the moment of newness, and that moment of newness is going to signal an about turn of things that do not have to happen. I think it's imperative in this case to say that it seems that a lot of the members of the MPP themselves realized that some things just did not go right. And I think at some point, perhaps there should have been more listening to the public, listening to Hajia, for instance. Hajia did mention that it does seem that perhaps more consultation or deeper consultation should have been done, deeper listening to the public should have happened. It appears that there was a cleavage at a point in time between the governors and the governed, and some things were pushed through regardless of the public sentiments of things. And the Ghanaian public have shown that when they're tired of things, they stop talking, and when they stop talking, that is the most dangerous moment for every government, because then they are waiting for a decision moment.
Fear delegates.
Well, perhaps. So the fresh start moment, it signifies that. But the second point, which has to do with the reckoning, and I think the president's speech again touched fundamentally on this. He spent a lot of time trying to recap how things haven't gone right, and how much of a difficult space and place Ghana finds itself. I think as a country, very few people, whatever the political divide and persuasion is, very few people will deny the reality, and the reality of the fact that Ghana is not in a good place. The fact that we're sinking under a high debt burden, the fact that corruption remains rampant, regardless of the evidence people may not be able to produce, the fact that the cost of living is astronomical and killing of the average person, and the fact that as a country, we appear not to be getting things right and we're losing our way.
So he said we will focus our initial efforts on 4 critical areas: economic restoration and stabilization of the macroeconomic environment, improvement of the business and investment environment, governance and constitutional reforms, and accountability and the fight against corruption. So you just summarized that.
Correct. Thank you very much for that. The fact that he appears to have recognized and identified the key drivers and levers that will move us out of that. And I'll come to that in my third point on the question of vision. But at this stage, the question of reckoning, the difficulties we have, the fact that corruption remains a problem, including what you highlighted earlier, and some things you mentioned in the speech, the 2020 Ayawaso West Wuogon election. I said West Wuogon because I was on the commission.
General election.
But the 2020 difficulties to the general election, for example, the fact that a whole commission was set up, the fact that the commission, and I'm saying this because I was on the commission, the fact that a commission was set up, the fact that the commission came out with recommendations, and the fact that 2/3 of the recommendations have not been implemented. We spent money on that. So there are a number of things that will baffle the neutral observer, that will baffle the political person, so to speak. And so the reality is that
he has been personally assisting some of the victims. So he appreciates this issue that you raised for Ayawaso West Wuogon, for example.
It remains a major concern. I'll tell you what, I have been particularly concerned, and in some cases, annoyed at the failure to implement the Ayawaso Commission report, because the consequences of Ayawaso were repeated in the last election. They keep getting repeated or being repeated from election to election, and they are low-hanging fruits every government can implement that will resolve matters. I would recommend that the Ayawaso Commission report should be looked at and fully, or at least substantially implemented. It will solve a lot of the problems. So in terms of reckoning, the president's speech appeared to have realized or recognized the fact that Ghana is not in the best of places. Indeed, the quantum of electoral percentage win that he had itself was a statement to the fact that Ghana was in a good place. Because if we are transitioning from a former government to a new government, and the new government got such a big mandate. It's a logical statement of the fact that the former government hasn't done that well. If it did that well, you wouldn't have that quantum leap from that former government to another government, not of the same party. So in terms of implicit statement, the election itself spoke volumes, and the president was merely endorsing and recognizing the fact that we aren't in a good place. That's for reckoning. And then the third one being on the vision, which is what he listed. He listed the 4 key critical areas, from governance reform to the business climate, to combating and fighting corruption. I think one thing the president appears to have done very quickly is to realize that Ghanaians watch from day one. And I think as Ghanaians watch from day one, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think oral was established before even the president was inaugurated.
That's right.
And that became some bit of a contestation. People were even asking, what mandate he had at the time, and they indicated that, look, this is just a preparatory. It's a statement of what is coming. But I think clearly there's an increasing recognition that the statement on corruption cannot be used as a political trump card, or as a political trump card which is not intended to be followed on with, or by way of implementation. The NPP, for example, in 2016, made a lot of, so to speak, political capital on corruption. Yeah. Ghanaians expected action. Between that time and now, it appears, and the average person will say, that corruption has rather grown in leap and bounds. So instead of rather scaling things back and making progress, we appear to have accentuated or rather worsened the difficulty of the challenge. It seems the president appears to have himself learned the lessons of his former office, because he was a former president. So having been there before, having paid a price in 2016, having had the chance to come back.
Some say that's an advantage to him, that he's been there before.
Have one advantage perhaps no other president in the history of Ghana has had before. Because no president in the history of Ghana has had a political vacation. He appears to have had that. He was in office, then he had a vacation. And then that vacation may have allowed him the requisite reflection, the opportunity of taking a step back and watching things from afar, the opportunity of therefore having a comparative framework of things, and therefore the ability to make better judgments. So it seems that his speech, once again, and his action is being reflected or informed by that. And the final one, in terms of the 4 elements that I indicated about inauguration speeches, which has to do with the rallying cry, it seems that, again, the president charged all of us. And I would hope that from an implementation standpoint, Ghana moves a bit away from the us and them. I think we have seen too much of that in the past. The tendency in which elections become political loss, not just political loss, but it becomes an economic loss for some people. The tendency in which election becomes a deficit for some segments of the populace, and others are kept out of the loop of entitlement until they have to wait and pray for another government coming to office. We have to get out of that. And remember that elections end on the 7th of December. And when elections end, the country must close ranks. We must come together, we must join forces and get engaged in the business of nation building. I did see or hear a chunk of that in the president's speech, and I must say that I was quite heartened. I was heartened to hear that we are one Ghana, we are one people, we are going to move forward, because the forces of poverty, the forces of suffering, the forces of underdevelopment, these know no political color. In the end, we're in this together. I think that the Constitution only recognizes election as the point of division for purposes of ideas. But once we go past that, the Constitution charges us, under the directive principle of state policy, that we should come together and develop this country. So I was very heartened listening to the president's message and inauguration speech and seeing the beautiful colors of the kente cloth and the the flag colors, and the entire display of oneness as a country. And the beauty of it, seeing all these foreign dignitaries there, the spotlight, the country being spotlighted by
and the special 4 symbols that he intentionally chose with his tailor.
Well, I was educated. I didn't know some of the meanings. I was educated. I think I was listening to the morning show.
That's right.
2-3 days ago, and Professor Adaimensa.
Yes, Ivan Adaimensa, former VC of the University of Ghana.
Educated all of us about the meanings of those symbols. I think as a country, it's beautiful to have a moment like this when you can see the country itself represented, for example, on the leader's dress, and suddenly we have to all go to school and get to learn about them. So I think something beautiful happened on the 7th of January, and I'm delighted that as a country, and we have to commend the NPP as well. You know, and this is the part of it as well. Look, it's true that the defeat was heavy, and there's little to say by way of challenge and contestation, but there's been some sobriety, and there's been some silence and peace, and an acknowledgement that it is done, and we're moving forward. And I do hope that...
He acknowledged Dr. Bawumia for the early concession.
Indeed, and I saw the pictures.
Yeah, but some say, why, did he have a choice really?
Well, no, he didn't.
If you are decimated in this manner, could you afford not to save face?
No, absolutely. Look, I saw Dr. Bawumia bowing before him. I heard the president acknowledge him and thank him for his early concession and what that did to the soul and peace of Ghana. There was an acknowledgement of political maturity on stage. Now, mind you, we had so many heads of state who were there.
That's right.
There are many African countries.
21 of them
were watching on.
24 envoys.
And I'm confident that many of these leaders will go back to their countries and suddenly they will try and mimic some of the things that they saw. So what we saw on the 7th was a demonstration and acknowledgement once again of the Ghanaian maturity. We have always been worried prior to election. We've always come out feeling proud. And I'm happy and confident that all the stakeholders and collaborators who have made this possible, it is once again an opportunity for us to just pat ourselves on the back, but more importantly, start the arduous task of lifting the common people out of poverty who daily sacrifice their little toil for the sake of Ghana. For the safety and prosperity of Ghana. And so I'm delighted about whatever happened on Saturday.
The symbolism, positive or negative, of bringing Tuareg.
I think it's absolutely positive. Now, I'll tell you something. First of all, the inauguration was a celebration of democracy. But how do you change non-democrats to become democrats? By showing them an example. I guarantee you, if Tuareg would decide that he is going to go civilian, it's perhaps maybe because he stood on the platform that advocated one thing, that the virtue of governance laid in democracy. You don't change people from the outside, you get them involved.
This is a military junta, and he gets the loudest applause among the foreign leaders who were there.
That was the worrying part. Yeah. The worrying part was the fact that the statement that democracy delivers the public goods may be overstated and may be in some ways wrong. The fact that people have the right to say whatever they want. People can sit in a studio like this and say all kinds of things. But what I was worried about is the fact that I saw him greeting the president with a pistol on his side. That, I'm telling you, was... So, but that's for the security people and security experts. But I was a bit worried about that aspect. Beyond that, however, I think it was a perfect example. It was a perfect scenario of seeing him on the platform of example, so that if he has any plans of changing, that was the moment for him to see how best to become a civilian government. I don't think the best way is to keep him out. We don't achieve anything by excluding him. No. In any case, he's our neighbor. And so the idea that you keep your neighbor out in the interest of democracy, when we have border scenarios or border difficulties, who do we call? And
it was good to also learn that a day after or so, he had meeting with the president, and they seemed to, be engaging in a way that may bring some fruits that many are expecting, that he too may transform, so that Burkina base will begin to also see democracy, the return to democracy. You've been listening to Professor Kofi Abochi, Dean, UPSA Law School, and we will take a break here. When we return, my other guest, Joyce Bauer, is here. Professor Kweku Asare is also standing by. Oliver Bakavomawo is on. Hajia Rabi Salifu is also here. And when we return, I do my take briefly, then we hear them in full blast. Of course, we will also focus some attention on the things the president has begun to do right after he was sworn in. This is Newsfile. We'll be right back. You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform, and here on Newsfile, as always, we put Ghana first. And we've just done with the first hour, and we have heard the erudite renditions and divergent opinions from our guests, Joyce Bauer Muktari, Professor Kweku Asare, Professor Kofi Abochi, Oliver Bakavomawo, and Hajia Rabi Salifu. And we get into the next phase of our discussion. So stay right here. But time for me to get you my take very briefly. So my take, I title it Punish the Criminal Vigilante Takeovers. Punish the Criminal Vigilante Takeovers. This will not be new to you because this will not be the first time I'll be saying this on this platform. Ghana has a law. It is called the Presidential Transition Act 2012, Act 845. It was passed to regulate political transfer of power after an election. This became necessary because party foot soldiers, did I say party foot soldiers? In fact, so-called big men in the NDC and NPP appear to lose their sense of civility and patience to follow the law, to take over management of public toilets and toll booths even. It is also the case that some political appointees, thieves, provoke party tax. The party tax we have wrongly labeled as vigilante groups. There have been allegations of destruction of documents and concealment of all sorts of things to cover up wrongdoing. Yes, even high-rank officials faced unusual accusations of stealing fittings, including carpets, and the famous and politically connected court allegedly changing the identity of an expensive state vehicle in a garage to keep it. In 2017, the NPP-affiliated Delta and Invisible Forces besieged offices and openly terrorized their victims. They even attacked a court to free their members standing trial, but they were treated with kid gloves for their felonies. The rampaging foot soldiers invaded and locked up offices at the Tema port and in other regions. The NDC thugs are visiting same places today. We were told to shut up when we condemned the criminal conduct. Party chairman, a trained lawyer who has risen to become a deputy speaker of parliament while an MP, joined the rather reckless leaders and members in defending the thuggery. Quote, they are defending state property, end quote. We were told by Freddie Blay. One other chairman of the party, Kwame Bafo, alias Abronye, led a team to seize cars on official instructions from the Jubilee House. The NDC, whose officials suffered the indignities, are today encouraging and sponsoring the same wrong. The party thugs are all over the place, and in some cases led by a party chairman, Joseph Yamin, to disrupt and imperil legitimate and official gold transaction. They are locking up offices and official residences. In the Oti region, they mistook 3 Catholic priests, missionaries from India, for thieving public offices and beat them mercilessly on completely false allegations. It is surprising these people, who were later led by party officials to apologize, have not been arrested to stand trial. These thugs don't have to bear names like the Azoka Boys or Delta Force before they can be dealt with by the state. It is not only group conduct in vigilantism that is criminal in Ghana. Their very acts are proscribed by the Vigilantism Act 2019. Threat of harm, threat of death, assault, trespass, and damage to property are all arrestable offenses in Ghana. So, why are the police looking on and acting helpless despite complaints by MPP officials? President John Mahama has issued a general condemnation of these acts, but that's not enough. Sir, call the Yamins and the Basantalis and their boys by name, and it might bring the results we seek, an end to this impunity. I was lawyer for Kofi Adams when his home was besieged, trespassed, and his cars were seized without basis, absolutely none. We got the cars returned. I have represented YEA staff employed by MPP and sacked under NDC. I have also represented YEA staff employed by NDC and sacked by NPP. I've done same for high-rank officers upon change in government. Just when will the circus end? By Section 14 of the Transition Law, the following appointees lose their jobs upon a change in government. 1. The persons holding office under the Presidential Office Act, 1993. 2. Ministers and deputy ministers of state. 3. Regional and deputy regional ministers of state. 4. Special assistants, special aides to the president, to the vice president, and to the ministers of state, deputy ministers, regional ministers, and deputy regional ministers. 5. Non-career ambassadors and high commissioners. 6. And finally, persons appointed by the president or a minister of state as members of statutory boards and corporations. But there's a caveat there. In January 2017, Eduji Tameklo led his friend Theophilus Donko to the Supreme Court and got the court to give a narrow reprieve for heads of public corporations, statutory boards, and authorities. That is, they can only be removed in accordance with the terms of their contracts and law. In part 2 next week, I will speak about effecting responsible and lawful citizen arrest of suspected looters of state property and wrongdoers during such transitions, and the need to resource the office of the Administrator General and the Estate Unit as part of effective measures to end the recurring violent takeovers. And that is my take. I return quickly to my guest. You're welcome back. And guess what? President Mahama is at work. Now, there is a new executive instrument, Civil Service Ministries Instrument 2025. We'll try and put it out so that you see under the hand of the president. And the following have become the new ministries. There's a Ministry of Finance, it stays as it is. Ministry of Health stays as it is. Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Education. Then, get this, Ministry of Energy and Green Transition. Ministry of Roads and Highways stays there. Ministry of Transport, Ministry of Sports and Recreation, Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Justice, Lands, Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources. Then Ministry of Local Government, Chieftaincy and Religious Affairs, boxed together. Ministry of Foreign Affairs stays alone. Ministry of Communication, Digital Technology and Innovations. Ministry of Environment, Science and Technology stays there. Ministry of Youth Development and Empowerment. The president mentioned this, that he was going to make a dedicated place, create a dedicated place for youth development during his campaigns. Ministry of Works, Housing and Water Resources stays there. Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Protection. Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Creative Arts. Ministry of Labor, Jobs and Employment. Ministry of Food and Agriculture. Ministry of Fisheries and Aquaculture. Ministry of Trade, Agribusiness and Industry. Take note of that. Trade, Ministry of Trade, Agribusiness and Industry. And the previous one, EI 2021, is revoked by John Mahama. Thank you. Now, let's stay here, and I will go to my guest on Zoom, Professor Kweku Asare. Prof, the inauguration, your highlights, the swearing in, your highlights, over 21 leaders from the sub-region, Africa, and even beyond coming here, 24 envoys, and we are hearing that this must be the first time that we have had them in such numbers attending a swearing-in ceremony for a president in Ghana. And then you also heard the president. What are your highlights?
My brother Abochi did a thorough job of raising the highlights. I would want to add that as I observed the president, he felt, I could see that he was feeling the weight of the moment. He's a second-term president whose second term is sui generis in the sense that it's not a consecutive term. So he's had the opportunity to sit back and reflect, unlike most second-term presidents who tend to assume that they have ascended to the second term because of some good work that they have done in the first term. That can be a burden, because if you assume that the electorate have endorsed your first term, it may lead you to lose focus. He doesn't fall into that category. He's had his first term, then there was an 8-year gap of reflection. And you could feel that he was feeling the weight of the moment, that our democracy is in danger. And it's upon him to right the ship of state. You could tell that. And the notes that he played, Abochi has highlighted many of them. I want to highlight others. He talked about truth-telling, that he would always tell us the truth. And that to me was extremely important because of his vandal origins. The president and I are both from Commonwealth Hall, and our motto is truth stands.
That's right.
So when he said truth-telling, he was speaking to me directly. It really touched me, and I could feel that he meant it. Then his emphasis on accountability was very important, because corruption, waste, financial loss have become a culture that we have accepted. And I get the feeling that the president understands that something has to be done. And you discuss his preparatory work on oral. I like oral.
Yeah, some are surprised that people of your caliber always insisting on the due process of law. You are in support of oral.
What is the absence of due process with oral? Oral is nothing more than a corruption CCTV. It's a closed circuit TV. It says all eyes are on you. If you see something, say something. That's what oral is. I don't know why this is unlawful. If you see your neighbor's house burning and you call the fire service, what is unlawful about that? Why is corruption so important that if you see that somebody is corrupt, you are not allowed to pick up the phone and call somebody at the presidency or somebody in authority that, hey, this guy is engaging in corruption, or this policeman is asking me to pay a bribe? I just don't understand the fuss about lawlessness. It's just this whole notion that corruption will always fight back, and somebody puts up some tweet, and then the whole world is talking about due process. What due process has been violated? There's no violation of due process. The president is simply saying, if you see corruption, report it to me, but I'm a busy man. So I'm setting up this hotline or this group of people so that if you see corruption, you go tell them, and then they can sit through the information and direct it to the proper people. That is something that should be institutionalized, because corruption is really ruining this nation. And we can't be nice about how we fight it. We must confront it like we are in a war. Otherwise, it's going to devour us. So I love his emphasis on accountability. And I could feel once again that he meant it, because of that 8 years that he's been out of power, and he's observed what is going on, and he's diagnosed what is wrong with the country. Then I also like the fact that he hit on the note of unity. He says, I'm going to be the president of all. Whether you voted for me or not, I'm your president. And this shouldn't be all that interesting, but it is, because it has not always been that way. Abochi mentioned the we versus them mentality in the country, or the we versus them culture in the country. That is not sustainable.
I don't recall a president who didn't say that I will be president for all of you, those who voted for me and those who did not.
But that's why I preface my remarks by saying his second term is sui generis. He sat back, and for 8 years, he's watched things and he's learned valuable lessons. And so when he says something, that's what I'm saying. It means more to me because of the reflection that he's had that most second-term presidents don't have. And so when he hits that unity note, it's because he probably has understood that unity is a problem. And you just talked about the executive instrument that is issued, reducing the ministries from 30 to 23. I mean, my memo to him, I don't know whether he read it or not, was that it should be 20. But I take the 23, it's good. It's close to 20 than 30. What I would have loved was that this was done not with an executive instrument, but with legislation, with a statutory amendment, so that it becomes ensconced. I mean, an executive instrument, the next president can come and revoke it and increase it to 40. But you have to create some culture where it is not too easy to create a ministry. You know, the fact that the president can just come and by the signing of a paper, he create 5 more ministries, that should belong to the past. A ministry is something that requires logistics, personnel, and so on. So the only time that you should successfully be able to create a ministry is if you have gone through parliament, gone through consultation, and so on. Ideally, we shouldn't be changing ministries the way we do. I also like the way he reached out to the outgoing president and talked about how the outgoing president addresses him with Johnny. The way he reached out to my good friend, the former Vice President Baumia. It was nice. It was a nice ceremony. And I must tell you that when I watched it, I was very proud as a Ghanaian. I was very proud as a Vandal. And I was very proud to be as a friend of the president, as well as a friend of the outgoing Vice President.
Right.
So this is something that Ghanaians should celebrate. But as you try to allude to, it must be followed by action. Action number 1, there must be zero tolerance for corruption. That is a must. Action number 2, there must be recovery of all looted assets. Any divergence from that will create all kinds of problems. There has to be total commitment to the recovery of all stolen assets.
All right.
Action number 3, personnel is policy. The president must continue to convince us that he's reaching out and he's using the best people to do the job. So far, I'm very impressed with the appointments that he's made. Atoforsin, Dominic Ayini, Gina Paul, Callistus Mahama, These are very good people. And it gives me hope that something different is going to happen. And of course, you know me, I'm going to be observing. And as long as he's on the right track, I will edge him on. But any deviation from the right track, and you know, go spend will go crazy. So happy to be a Ghanaian. Very, very good inauguration. I got to congratulate the persons who put it together. I hear NDC has a guru in these matters. We got to congratulate him. Maybe we need to appoint him to do it for the nation, whether or not
that's
NDC is in power. Pardon?
Standogbe you are referring to.
Okay, Standogbe, that is a national asset. He did a good job. And that's somebody who we should use, whether or not the NDC is in power, because he's proving that he knows how to do these things.
Okay. And so you're also happy the president just beginning to say a few things quickly. His commitment to review the Constitution. I know if I don't watch you on that, we will take the next hour discussing that. But very briefly about what you have to say about that, plus the instructions to, as it were, investigate the 2020 election, killings, 8 people, and also the 2024, we're told about 5 or so people were killed again.
I mean, I'm absolutely for that, investigating deaths. Beyond investigation, we have to ask the question, why hasn't the investigation been done, and hold some people accountable? You know, the police should not wait for a president to come and tell them, investigate the death of somebody. That is something that we pay them to do. And if they are not doing it, then we want to know why. Were there political pressures on them and so on? And then hold the people accountable who did not allow that to happen. Of course, on constitutional review, you know where I stand. Look, we've operated the Constitution for 32 years, and I don't need anyone to review the Constitution to tell me where changes need to be made. I can tell you where the changes need to be made. So what I want the president to do is to bring bills, or to encourage people to bring bills to make changes. We need to elect our district executives. We need a cap on the number of justices, both at the Supreme Court and at the Court of Appeal. We need a cap on the number of constituencies. I personally have nothing with the ex gratia problem, because I believe that's a problem created by the committees that we set up. If we set up good committees, if you put me on a committee, my ex gratia will be a plaque, a certificate of appreciation. So one way or the other, somebody is going to determine the salary and benefits of government officials.
Right.
And the question is, well, how do we do it? I don't think that requires a constitutional amendment. That can be addressed with a statutory amendment. People sometimes confuse what can be done statutorily and what can be done with a constitutional amendment. Constitutions do very simple things.
All right.
It creates a government and defines their power. So if you want a change, the change should be subtle things that are not working.
Right.
But to get a commission, review the Constitution, that tells me there's no problem. We are looking for problems to solve.
Right.
We did one 2010, and 14 years ago, we are still talking about it. What did we learn from that? And let's get to work. Let's start the amendment process now, rather than another review of the Constitution.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Haja, the president says that he will focus on what he calls his focus on initial efforts on 4 critical areas: economic restoration and stabilization of the macroeconomic environment. We know that's been hemorrhaged. Improvement of the business and investment environment, governance and constitutional reforms, and accountability, and the fight against corruption. What were your highlights?
Yes, thank you very much, Samson. And then before I get there, I want to take you back a little by just making it more clearer on what my sister spoke about, the history in Parliament. I see it to be more of a unique happening during the last administration or the selection of the Speaker of Parliament. We all saw what happened. It was unprecedented. Hung Parliament. Numbers were actually very, very critical in the process. And seeing what happened was only justified. And that, I find it needless for the president to have come openly to say, get this person to be the leader, instead of going through the electoral processes that we all expected. So, of course...
So you don't buy the explanation that honestly, this was intended to calm and avoid a repeat of 7th January 2021?
I have listened to other people from different countries, especially Nigeria, telling us that, look, you guys have done very well from our campaigning to election to post-election. This country has been largely peaceful, and there wasn't any need to say you are curbing tensions or you are putting mitigative factors to curb it.
Okay, your highlights on the swearing in of John and Jane.
I want to take it this way. I don't know if I can touch on your take before I progress.
My take is not for discussion.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to add something, but it's fine. I'll leave it there. I want to look at the protocol, the flair of the program, then policy direction of President Mohammed's speech. Looking at the protocol, I'll start with my brother, Prof. Botchd's point. You see, somebody told me again that, Rabbi, I got so intimidated, especially when I saw President Mohammed holding Ibrahim Traore's hand. Did you see that?
He held almost everybody's hand.
No, he had a way he held his hand.
He held Baumia's hand. He held several others.
He had a way he held it. Okay, that's even quite low.
All right,
but
make your point.
Yes. Coming on there, I'm not a security person, but just a lay person's view. I think he having, like Prof said, the side pistol with his other security detail being heavily armed wasn't too good for us. Even the optics of it wasn't done well. Now the question is, what conversations went on between the national security, between the new government, and also to some extent the existing structures or systems security-wise that we have in this country? I would want to say, look, given the cheers he got, how louder the applaud went, and also bringing it to the fact that the NDC is coming from a tradition or history of coup and all that, I was like, okay, so those clapping so hard, what is in their mind? Was that a validation? Is that to say our young people would want to try that again?
They have said that even in official surveys, if you haven't heard, that they prefer military regimes to the democracies because the democracies are failing. They are not delivering the dividends.
That is also because when we do well to detach ourselves from working in silos and then coming together to work as a team for the bigger benefit of the country, then that confidence will come back. And then now we are resetting, isn't it? I just want to believe that this reset that Ghanaians are calling for, have called for, is going to come differently from what they didn't like, so that we can say, okay, we have that confidence back and nobody will be talking about coup versus democracy and all that, because I think democracy is certainly the way to go. And I heard Prof say he is sure the discussion that was held after would have motivated him to want to go back, and other leaders that came to say, okay, we want to really be more democratic like Ghana than what we are practicing. Flair of the program, I loved how the women appeared. I'm being gender biased, but that's fine. I saw Hajia Samira Bawumia, my own Samira Bawumia, my own beautiful Samira. She appeared in the African kente. Precisely
the usual
Ghanaian, elegance. Yes, so beautiful. And I sat there and was wondering how she would have stood there as a first lady. But God's time is the best. My sister was outstanding as well. She took to TikTok. We saw all that. We saw her at the grounds. Event organization, they got it well. 2016, a lot of their activities, including party reorganization, wasn't done too well. So I saw some benefit in losing from them. So that defeat, they got huge gap, moved them to the drawing board to say, what do we do? What do we get right? What do we learn from the NPP? And having learned how we do our branding, having learned how we do our stage craft and everything, I sat and said, wow, our guys have actually learned so well from the NPP. And that gave us that respect on the global scheme. People were happy with that. They said, look, Ghana, everything was top-notch, except that of Ibrahim Traore, when people were talking or had spoken about. Going quite specific on the policy direction. Yes, talking about the thematic areas or key indicators, macroeconomy and all that. This got me. And then I being somebody from a pro-poor region, I would say this actually got me. And I read from what the president said. Quote, we need to look beyond temporary fixes to find lasting solutions for the complications we have experienced with power, water, and sanitation. We must continue to invest in our agricultural sector and grow our economy to that so that it lifts the bulk of our most crippling financial burden, especially among the poorest of the population. I'll end it here because I don't have to read on and on. Now, when I looked at it, I said, yes, we should be very particular and deliberate about pro-poor policies. We should look at how best we can implement certain policies or agenda in the country that would get women, children, and the vulnerable largely benefiting. The point here is sustainability. We have reset versus sustainability. And I'll go quite practical here.
Why is it versus? Versus
because we are for continuity, and we were for continuity.
The Women's Bank is not sustainable?
Even my sustainability here is in context.
Okay.
And that is what where I am coming. The point of mentioning agric, water, sanitation, and among others, is that when you look at even education first, before agric, gender parity is something this government will never stop talking about. And nobody can take that from President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo in terms of education, free SHS to be precise. When you look at the boy-girl ratio enrollment at the senior high, we all saw 100 to 64. That says in every 100 students, or for every 100 boys, you would have had only 64 girls. And now it's gone the other way. It's a whole flip. 64 boys versus 64 boys versus 106 girls. Now, the young woman in Wulensi that I know personally, I don't know if it's okay to mention her name, but her father is probably watching this program because he told me he was going to watch it. She calls me her mentor. She got to come to Wesley Girls. I'm sure my sister went to Wesley Girls. And Wesley Girls is a school that every woman would want her girl child to go. And we all have seen the products of Wesley Girls in this country. Now, how did she get there? Access was made available. Now she graduates and comes home. Instead of now saying, okay, Rabi is the satellite person or Fatima Abukari is somebody we can look up to, the numbers have started increasing. And when you look at it long term, we are going to have more productive young women coming from the north and other parts of the country that would help in the growth of this country. And that is also zeroing to the economic growth of this country. Now, when we also look at agric, we did our best. We looked at irrigation farming. Even extension service officers from 2016, when we had about 2,000 extension service officers, and then it was 1:700 farmers, one officer to 700 farmers. Today we can say that has increased to over 4,000 extension officers in the country. We can as well look at other areas. My point of sustainability is yes, you are resetting, you want to reset. The speech, just like Prof said, Professor Sari and then Professor Botched said, gave some hope. However, are we going to end it there? Are we going to see this current government doing what we call continuity of the good projects or programs that the government had rolled out. Because if you say, because I didn't start it, and a clear example is the Tamale International Airport. They ended up making runways, aprons, some lights on it, and all that, saying they had secured some funding to continue. Unfortunately for them, they went out of power. We came to continue. And when we even started it, that was the only time we started hearing what legacy project, legacy. But of course, that should have also been a plus for President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo and the government entirely. Because if somebody had started something good, then you come to continue, then it says that you are really doing good to the country. Prof. Asare got a bit carried away by most of the things the president said, talking about transparency, truth, aura, and all that. Yes, it's good. But I want to humbly tell him I like where he ended on the action thing. But I want to say, yes, he should actually give them some space. So we should be optimistic, but a little doubts would also help us.
Well, he was cautious. Somewhat,
yeah, I saw that he was.
He made a point. And for those of us listening to him keenly and carefully, we could see what he was talking about. The advantage John Mahama has, having gone for a vacation and returned. And he speaks about Akufo-Addo, for example. Akufo-Addo came in and civil society were doing their job in criticizing him. He looked at them in the face, called them to a meeting at the presidency, and said, I have ministers and whoever who are even better than some of you. So stop what you're trying to do. You don't know it all, and so on and so forth. You know, that kind of thing. And he's coming from a certain place.
That made me to agree with his points of action, his expectation. And he killed it by saying he would go back to get his pen when they start to misbehave. Now, I want to even expand that to what other Ghanaians also feel. The NDC came to sign a social contract with Ghanaians with a clear direction of 24-hour economy, with a clear formation of 1:3 or 1:3. Now, the statistics I have with me says clearly that as of February 2023, the public service employees that we had in this country was about 688,000. And then someone would tell you, even by close of 2024, we had moved to about 800,000. That is it. Now, the expectation is so clear that, and huge, that with this 800,000, granted we are even using the 800,000 figure, by the close of 2026, the young person who listened to the formation or the equation that was given 133 is expecting this figure to triple. Because if one job is to give you 3 employees, so we would have had times 3 of 800,000, which would have given you about what? 2.4 million Ghanaians getting new jobs. So that is expected.
All right.
Also, Samson, light is something that Ghanaians do want us to keep on.
Right.
And unfortunately, during the inaugural service, when the ceremony had finished, we had a minister designate currently, a brother of mine who has been around for some time in energy, coming out to press the fear and panic button, which I find very much needless at that time, because we had gotten the investor confidence back. We had gotten people who had their eyes on Ghana. We had
John
gotten
Jinapo
people
is on the transition team
who followed.
Energy.
Yes.
As you can see, he's been appointed to go there as a substantive minister. So if he has seen that there are problems with the energy sector and that you were supposed, the NPP regime was supposed to have made some procurement for the purposes of keeping the light on, and it wasn't done, and that it would take about, is it 8 weeks or so to have these things done, and he's telling the public, what's wrong about that?
Samson, with all humility, what I want to say is that he was there. He was a member of the committee. Instead of focusing on issues of his interests, with the real fact that the NDC is coming out of doomsday history, what I personally expected was clearly that he would be much interested in what goes into the transition processes concerning
Okay,
energy.
the president says there will not be doing so. They have taken
ask.
the steps that have to be taken.
He had questions
and
to
this
ask.
will not happen. So thank you very much. Let's come to Joyce. The elegance of yourself and Samira is highlighted by Rabi, but the elegance, of the vice president is what attracts the attention of some of my viewers. Kweku says that can Hajia just not just commend the organization of the inauguration without trying to take some credit for the NPP?
They learned it from
and
us.
how did she only see the beauty of Samira and not the vice president? Even that guy like me saw the matching handbag of the vice president vis-a-vis her beautiful dress. For once, can our politicians put aside partisanship that we all are tired of? Yes, Joyce.
Well, certainly a very good morning to everybody. It almost sounded as if Rabi has been talking like the whole morning, really. And let me very quickly state very, very succinctly that I loved something about the inaugural speech for a fact. It is a preamble, the opening, where President John Dramani Mahama actually says, "Our Father who art in heaven, thank you for giving me this day, a day that offers me, your humble servant, a unique opportunity to reset Ghana." On this very, very auspicious occasion, President John Dramani Mahama had reason to thank God and to bring the glory of God into this auspicious ceremony on a platform that every international observer actually followed with so much hope, so much anticipation, such expectation that indeed we were actually ushering in a new dawn, one where we have a certain sense of a new leadership, a man who brings enormous experience to the job. I believe that a lot has actually been said already about President John Dramani Mahama's experience. A lot has also been said about this overwhelming endorsement, which clearly communicated also an outright repudiation, a total rejection, a referendum on the MPP administration led by President Adudankwa Akufo-Addo, and every single Ghanaian, at least majority of us, were telling them in very clear terms that this is not the governance that we were expecting, and that 8 years down the line, we thank you for at least putting yourself up to serve us, but no thank you, and certainly no thank you to your hand-picked successor, former Vice President, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia. I am certain that God continues to work in the affairs of man. I believe that at this moment, we cannot but all be agreed, let's be adidem, that the raison d'etre for which new leaders are elected to serve us is because we want something refreshing. There's very few things that we can all, literally, there are few things we've never seen before. Everything we see now is actually a reinvention of what exists. It's actually innovations on what we already have. Look at the choreography. Look at the production. You can see that everything was intentional. Funny that Mr. Mahama's attire, his apparel, the agbada, has become such a huge sense of a rallying call for all of us. It symbolizes our hope. It symbolizes our aspirations. And when you actually walk into President Mahama's home, these symbols are actually on a wall in that house. I'm sure that many people have not noticed that he actually lives by the emblems and the symbolism of these Edinkra signs that we have. And when you look at his cufflinks, that's another thing that he wears all the time. They are actually all carved in these symbols. The beauty about the outfit is that it was curated to reflect a man of deep introspection. If you know President Mahama personally, and I'm delighted that Professor Kweku Asari mentioned that he had actually sent him a memo, and every time he sends these memos, he'll copy me in them. And you'll be surprised that you'll walk in And Mr. Mahama is waiting to have a conversation about something that he received from Prof. and the viability or otherwise of it, or that I'm adding on this and maybe tell Prof, this is what I expect to see. You know, there is a quality about President Mahama. It's his ability to interact with persons from all walks of life. And it's the fact that he also surrounds himself with enormous talent. You will be surprised the objectivity that he expects from those of us who work very closely to him. And this is one individual that if you were to walk in on a morning when President Mahama is wearing something, and then you look at it and you say, no, maybe we should do something else. Sometimes he will even ask you, so we're going here, what do you think I should wear? You know, this is a man of enormous thoughtfulness. I am delighted that God also granted him a second opportunity, another window to step onto this seat of government. And let's see just how differently he intends to lead this country this time. Ghanaians want leaders who come in to serve them. Ghanaians want leaders who exhibit compassion. Ghanaians want to see a leader who also exhibits a sense of sensitivity to what they expect. But let's look also at the goodwill that heralded this new dawn. The numbers of heads of state from Africa and beyond, the conversations in the United States of America by the outgoing President Biden administration about who should represent them at this particular inauguration, the conversations from the United Kingdom about who should represent the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, the many prime ministers, vice presidents, envoys, and what have you, who thronged this, Black Star Square on that auspicious occasion. And the beauty about it was the resplendence, the reflection of our Ghanaian aspirations, how this symbol of, a belief in a better time for you, that was actually encapsulated and beautifully reflected on Mr. Mahama's attire, actually spoke volumes. The presence of his wife, the First Lady, Her Excellency, Madame Lodina Dramani Mahama, their lovely children who were all there now, all adult children, and indeed, the patriotism, the nationalism. And I love how President Mahama landed. He said that this beautiful country of ours is open once more for business. Note that in the 4 thematic areas that he spoke to, the first thing was to do with the fact that we ought to re-look at our microeconomic issues, an economic restoration, not an economic reset only, but an entire restoration of what the economy needs. A presidential office whose budget approved by Parliament is in excess of 2 billion Ghana cedis. It's against the poor Ghanaian citizen who elected them into office. A large-sized government of well over 120 ministers and other appointees and counting. A system that actually rewarded just about anybody and everybody, save the people who elected them into office. On this particular auspicious occasion, we had talent like no other. And when I speak to the talent that the NDC has, there is a certain legacy that President Mahama will be leaving our democracy. It is in the numbers of young people that his whole time in politics has also inspired. Note the numbers of volunteers, the many youth, the many women, and this campaign actually was powered by the women and the young men of our great party. And look at the map of the election. There is no region in Ghana where the NDC did not receive support beyond our backbones that are largely our own territories. Look at the others too. The Western region is a new entrant where we won the majority of seats. The Central region, the most progressive thing that has happened in the last few years is the fact that for the very first time, Ghana has elected and sworn into office a female vice president of the Republic of Ghana. And you see, this is not just tokenism. This is a woman of many firsts. And I call her Nana Sipe because she is also a former senior prefect of the Girls High School. Nana comes to this job with enormous goodwill, with many accomplishments both locally and internationally. A great story of inspiration, of motivation, a reason why we believe that women can. And a few days ago, I had a fantastic opportunity to see our father, the Yagbonwura, when he called on President John Mahama. And his bodyguard was female. And in Gonja, we call them Mbonwura. So now I'm even wondering what the converse is when you have a female bodyguard. Look, Samson, something great is happening for Ghana. And just look at the first week in office. Even before he was sworn into office, we had conversations about oral Operation Recover or Loot. You see, not every action should necessarily be cast in law, for example. There is a great raison d'etre for which society also listens to its citizens. And when you go to prosecute a campaign, you return to the table knowing just what the people are expecting. And yesterday we saw the inspection by that committee. And funny enough, some of the outcomes will interest you. That some people who have actually bought land that were assets belonging to the state, now saying that those assets should actually be returned to the state and that they are actually no longer even interested in pursuing the purchases. That must be something that is actually heartwarming.
Are they
that
not
is
saying
epic.
that out of frustration and
potentially
embarrassment that they will suffer
but there
under
must
the oral?
also be that sense of patriotism from our citizens beyond the law. That beyond taking them to court, especially when you hear that on some of these lands where nothing has taken place, they are just bare lands.
State lands.
Absolutely. And why do you think that this is actually such an important conversation? We inherited most of these things from our very first leader after independence. Over 60 years later, why should we allow an administration that comes into office for 8 years to literally partition everything that we hold dear and split to persons of great interest in their political party? This is something that every citizen of Ghana, Samson, is actually very interested in. And be that as it may, take all the legalities aside. People want to see a president deliver to their satisfaction. You see, look, we serve at the pleasure of the good people of Ghana. The best thing about this election is that Ghanaians have told us that our nascent democracy has probably come to stay. That even though there's a lot of apathy between our young people and what democracy actually offers them, a hungry stomach knows that if I can change this leader, something better would happen. An unemployed young person seeing the many people gratuitously living in the corridors of power at the pleasure of President Akufo-Addo and his family and friends members, and allowing a few people to feed fat on what should belong to all of us. For the very first time, we also have an inaugural speech that had no slogans, that actually reflected the reality of what is at hand, that spoke about a very difficult economic environment, that spoke to the challenges with hardship of the ordinary Ghanaian citizen, that now the Ghanaian citizen has actually also given to President Mahama and Professor Nana Jane Opoku-Agyeman a great number of members of parliament. That also speaks volumes, that on that day, many people went to cast their ballot looking at what their personal circumstances have been in the last 8 years. Everybody who took that step to go out there and vote for change did so with very high expectations. One thing I took away from this beautiful speech is the fact that it actually in many ways restores enormous hope. We can dream again, Mr. Mahama said. We can hope again, Mr. Mahama said. We can look forward to a leader who will do things and do them differently. You know, for many people who served at all levels of this great man from the minute he left office, and not many of us even believed at the time that he will want to return to contest for the elections. But for those who believed in that vision, we believe that a time will come when many people will realize that Ghana needs a leader who will also be sincere, a leader who will be compassionate, a leader who will not come to enrich himself or his members of his family, and a leader who will also try very hard, okay, to actually express to the people in ways that we probably have often overlooked, that there is also space for others other than myself or my appointees. And he's told us, if you are going to be my appointee and you're going to come into office to continue with the arrogant posturing of the S1 administration, you have no place in my government. If you are coming in to seek personal aggrandizement, you have no place in my government. If you are coming in also just for personal gain, you have no space in my government. And a few days ago, one of our very distinguished party elders said to me, when all the appointments are in place, you people need to sit together and agree on how you intend to live in government, because you've also been in opposition for a very, very long time. But there must be discipline, and the discipline, Samson, must be demonstrated. And President Mahama spoke about something in the inaugural speech, and that he will expect that there will also be a quid pro quo of sorts, that I am willing to deliver for you. I have Nana in place to deliver for you, but you must also join me. Give me the support that I need so that together we can build the Ghana that all of us will be proud of. Samson, we are overly indebted at over 740 billion and counting. We have actually been locked out of international markets. We no longer have all the investors that we used to boast of. They've all left, and all we have now are awards of huge international arbitration courts, and everything goes against Ghana. What we are looking forward to is a very modest administration, okay? In outlook, in stature, in everything.
And the office of the president, is that why you are not spending on the president's portraits?
Let me tell you something, Samson. You see, there are many avenues for corruption.
Okay.
And corruption has become systemic, is endemic. You see, when there's extreme nepotism and extreme partisanship, note that corruption actually flourishes in many ways. I have worked in the public service before, and believe you me, all these little things, production of diaries. You remember the very public issue about diaries. You remember the issues about even portraits of the president, for example. In America, wealthy as they are as a nation, people sponsor inaugurations. And of course, this is one of the great suggestions that we received, but of course, time was of the essence, and it was very close to the occasion. So yes, we couldn't take this on board. But of course, I am hoping that in future, these are ways that we can explore also to even involve largely the private sector. So beyond all the things that we want to discuss is the fact that we are actually ushering in a new dawn. A new dawn where we don't come and sit and talk about parity in the tertiary education, because, Samson, we also achieve parity at the primary level.
All right.
It is the only reason why you can actually build blocks on that level of parity to see same reflected in the tertiary institutions.
Right.
But for the first time, Samson, we've heard about WAEC being owed. We've heard about tuition fees not going. We've heard about feeding grants not going. For the first time, there's also new liberties where people are speaking out and knowing very well that they will not be sanctioned, they will not be sacked, you will not be invited to the Jubilee House and told off. That parliamentarians, everybody now, look, parliamentarians lost their seats because they stood up to former President Akufo-Addo, and we know them. Api Akubi is in the system, everybody knows that. Let's stop nitpicking and focus on the fact that this is a completely failed administration. Certainly they did their best, they tried very hard, but corruption literally probably undermined everything that they assumed that they were doing. Keeping the finance minister in office for way beyond his welcome was another thing. Refusing to listen to the same people. Look, all of you here, Samson, I never stop saying this. You gave President Akufo-Addo enormous support before he was sworn into office. That's fact. The many interviews you granted him and then Vice President Baumia were the reasons why they were propelled into office with the level of numbers of votes they got. At the time, they called it an overwhelming mandate. And so they could do everything beyond aid and beyond what? All of it just empty words. The first special prosecutor, the Special Prosecutor Act. We heard so many things. Look, I am delighted also that President Mahama has demonstrated in the first few days of coming into office. The first thing is that there will be more action and less talk. So let me introduce the preparatory team of Oral on the sidelines of the transition work. Let me also be sure that I set up a committee that will actually start preparing towards what? The National Economic Dialogue. Let's look at the sectors such as energy, because we need to keep the lights on. And indeed, when we told you that we now had a sustainable solution to power distribution challenges, they were arguing there's excess of power and there's this and there's that. They inherited the energy sector levy. They capped it to borrow Today, we are saddled back in debt, and we need at least $90 million. You heard the instructions from WAPCO, for example, that they couldn't even carry on routine maintenance because government wouldn't pay, and government said, hold on. You see, these are the things that I say, that once they leave office, you will see the full length of the snake.
All right.
And for the many legislations that we speak of, the reality is that, Samson, life must also be about the people, first and foremost. If you create jobs, and I love the fact that special mention should be made of Mr. Guzitano, who will be overseeing the whole exercise
of the 24-hour economy,
24-hour economy
and jobs.
I love the fact that we've just received this constitutional instrument also, reducing drastically the amorphous size of government from 30 ministers to 23. Fantastic.
23.
Absolutely.
That together, if there is a deputy minister each, that will bring us to 46 ministers.
Absolutely. And
then the 16 regions, that will take us to 62 ministers. The promise is for 60 ministers.
And I love one thing. Don't forget that they promised 50. So please don't start jubilating.
Equalization is not
the next thing I want to speak about is there is a clear commitment, okay, to do things differently. Very clear commitment.
The president is not going to do the 60 he promised.
He has also just told you that I've reduced the number of ministries from 30 to 23.
No,
you see, look, for the levels of support that all of you gave to that failed administration, I will expect that you will all allow President Mahama to lead in the manner that he has promised. And I love what Prof just said, that in whatever we do, we must first and foremost commend the activities and actions that have been clearly so well communicated to us. And
you are not suggesting that this is a question I shouldn't ask. He promised 60 ministers.
You see,
he promised 60 ministers.
I will tell you one thing.
From how it is going, I suspect it's going to get to 62.
Samson, there are some ministers and ministries that do not need deputies. You see, I don't want us to, you know, let's look at the sides of the conversation that actually will impact the lives of the people of Ghana, okay? I believe that not every ministry, and in fact, it's also happier to, you know, look, you guys are deputy ministers who never even saw a piece of paper. This is what we are talking about.
And not every ministry.
And not every ministry
needs a minister.
We
don't realize that.
You know, let's be very honest.
The president is by the sorry.
Oh no, wait. Oh, Prof. Oh, well, of course. You know I will allow you to do that.
The president is a minister for all ministries.
Thank you.
And that's why the constitution limits the cabinet ministers to 19. Beyond that, the president can be a minister for every ministry. And so there are some ministries by their structure. You don't need a minister. We've already ministers. The chief directors do all the work. Ministers provide policy direction and coordination.
Right.
The president can decide to assume direct responsibility. So we sometimes create the impression that we need too many ministers. We frankly don't need them. So I'm just, you know.
The promise is very simple, okay? That I will run a lean and very efficient and effective government. And I believe that that is what Ghanaians want to see at this time.
Right.
The commitment has actually been clearly exhibited. And I believe that I will actually laud the speed with which these decisions are being made. And let me also say something. There is one beautiful thing about having new leaders, okay? Is that you can hope again. You can dream again. The young people who are actually just waiting to jackpot, struggling in the queues under the sun to get visas to leave because everybody who is not associated with the nepotism cannot find a job.
Thank you.
But Samson, let me land. Let me land because of something that Rabbi said. You see, even as they have lost and lost so abysmally, they still want to argue with the good people of Ghana. Never take the Ghanaian citizen for granted. And never take for granted a hungry and angry man. I know that over the last few years, President Mahama has had time to reflect on his time out of office. I also know that he actually comes in with enormous goodwill. And let me land by saying, may the hope and aspirations clearly provided in this inaugural speech and the hope and aspirations clearly put and curated beautifully on his outfit, may the goodwill that the good people of Ghana have actually given to him, and with the level of appointments that have already been made, I do know one thing, Samson, that with the help of God, Ghanaians can hope again. But for those who put up that world-class production, Mr. Standugbe, Event PR, the Mahama media team, the many young people in all the committees right down to the ushering. I believe they did a fantastic job. You know, Stan has enormous talent.
Thank you. Now,
it was the first time I actually saw that there was a whole architectural design to what should
thank you. I need to move on to someone else, and let me go to Oliver here. Your highlights, and I suspect that you also be interested in the Burkinabe leader and what happened at the event. And Rabi was just talking about the fact that President Mahama was holding him, and I was pointing to her that he's not the only one the president held when they exchanged pleasantries. The president held Baumia and others as well. What are your thoughts? Let's hear you. But let's be clear about this, that if there's any platform that gave blind support to the previous government, it was not this platform. Every move of theirs was checkmated. We questioned when we had to, we criticized when we had to. We were hated, we were disliked, but we did it. We'll do the same to this government so that they will live up. Yes.
I must say I joined the views of Professor Botched and Joyce as well on the intentionality of the event. I think the intentionality of the individual himself flowed into a lot of the things that we saw, and I think this is what we want these moments to reflect, and I think it is a nice feeling to watch and be appreciative of. But also on the point that I joined Professor Botched is that we should not take the transition for granted. And if we do that, we would have discounted, in fact, some of the lived experiences we have seen to this point and some of the conversations that have happened. We should not forget that some of the top CSOs in this country held an event where they were begging essentially that there should be no coup in this country. UB Citizens was formed in the fear that coup was imminent. That the past administration has tinkered so much with the Fourth Republic that we had gotten to the point that people were actually afraid that we might lose it. So it is significant to breathe again and to breathe in terms of what we saw. But it's also for me a last gap attempt to believe in the Fourth Republic. And Ibrahim Traore's endorsement or whatever it is that we saw there is, in fact, I like the contradiction that happened there. And I think, Kwesi Pratt mentioned the stark reality that democracy must justify and deliver on its own goods for people to accept it. We can't just preach to people. So it's a reminder of sorts that was necessary, and it's important that the president also noticed it and commented on it. But one of the things that is also important is also the foreign gestures that I saw. That the president, then elect and now president, was very intentional about these outreaches in repairing Ghana's relationship with its neighbors, in Ghana's stance against in Africa. I think that was overwhelming, the message that we received and that was responded to. I think that is important. I mean, as somebody who has worked at the foreign ministry myself, it's something that I look to, and I think that the body language vis-a-vis our neighbors in particular is changing from some of the things that we saw in the previous administration that I didn't like. This is one of the reasons why I was surprised again about the conversations around Traore. Yes, I admit that a gun is jarring, but we have to contextualize it as well. I understand that there's something that receives clearance, but most importantly, Burkina Faso is a nation at war. And so the president is a wartime, the head of state, there's a wartime head of state. And so the appearances and how they put themselves together reflects a nation at war. And for me, it's not a big problem. And if those are concessions that we'll make in order to repair our relationship, in order to bring back the folks in IES back into ECOWAS, it is important we do so, we set the tone clearly. I must say something here which is important. Somebody like myself who has lived and studied in Morocco for a long time, I was dismayed to find that the outgoing president on the eve, on 6th January, we withdrew our diplomatic recognition of the Sahrawi Republic and threw away over 60 years of Ghana's foreign policy on a whim and put the incoming president on effect before a fait accompli. I think it is irresponsible. It discounts the fact that the Sahrawi Republic is a founding member of the African Union. It discounts the fact that the Republic, in fact, the AU has issued legal opinions and statements on the issue, and I think it jeopardizes the roadmap to peace in the region. And I'm hoping that whoever is appointed foreign minister can find ways towards repairing and reversing that gesture, which is unfortunate.
Is that the state or country that's had meetings with the vice president?
No. So this is the Western Sahara.
Okay.
The vice president had met with Israel and Liberia, and then subsequently with the Palestine. But in fact, and what is actually interesting about this is that I have been watching some of the blogs in Morocco. The conversations which were being portrayed is that it's the new president who has done these acts and not the old one. So somehow I don't think that this is, and I think even I had a conversation with Bombandi on this, that I don't think that this is inadvertent. That there's something intentional about what was done on the eve of transition, which I think is unfortunate. The speech itself, look, I'm a speechwriter myself. I love the flow of it. I like the fluidity of it. I think it was really easy on the ear, and I think a lot of it worked with it. Now, with the content of the speech, the first time that a speech in the Fourth Republic is talking about constitutional reforms on that I have seen. It's an important indication about the need to mature our democracy that I think it is important to take note of. I like the emphasis on the climate agency as well, the question of the environmental degradation we have seen in this country, and the need to reset our relationship with the environment is one that we must talk about. I was a bit dismayed that even though the four priority areas talked about macroeconomic environment, investment environment, in fact, the real environment itself is not highlighted as a priority. But I do hope that when you're talking about governance, that the question of our relationship with our environment is also reset, and that our waters and our water bodies can breathe again. Now, the thing that there's no denying that the theme of reset ran through the campaign, and we can find a nice synergy also in terms of the speech. And I'm hoping that language of reset and unpacking as well is brought to the priority areas. For instance, in terms of the economic reset, I don't want it to be about macroeconomic data. The NDC historically is a party on the left. The left is instrumental it's always about the people's relationship with the economy. So it shouldn't be about the market. It must really focus on prioritizing in a long and sustainable way the well-being of the most vulnerable. And I'm hoping to see that. Some of us who are on the intellectual left will continue to hold the NDC to account on those commitments as well. When it comes to the business environment, a lot of the times when we talk about investment, we are overly focused on the foreigner, and that we are constantly putting our economy in perpetual audition for the foreign investor, and we forget to prioritize the Ghanaian businesses. This country must grow by its own industry. This is the time that we give the Ghanaian business a break. That in as much as we are looking to make our economies friendly to the outsider, it must be first responsive, and we must stop offering crazy incentives to foreigners, and must find ways to ensure that Ghanaians are in charge of our economy. Governance and constitutional reforms, I don't want to go into it. I think that because there's a lot of conversation to be done there. But if we must do it, we must do it in ways, again, that center people. And this means practically that districts cannot be sidelined in favor of party structures, that we must focus on decentralizing power. We must focus on how we can ensure inclusivity in decision-making processes, and bringing in those who we consider to be dissenting voices. There's something called the 10th man principle, that every time we are drawing a boundary, we must ask ourselves, what does the person who disagrees think? We must make room for dissent, which we haven't seen in the past, and I hope that reforms the way in which we view governance. On accountability and corruption, and Professor Sari talked about this, which is the government's relationship with the truth. If you go to my Twitter, something I highlight always is, what is government if words have no meaning? For me, there's a ethical obligation of the highest order for us to be told the truth, no matter how bitter it is. And so if it takes a minister designate for energy telling us on the eve of inauguration that we are 6 hours away from the likes of, that is the truth I want to see always. There should be nothing which we should feel the sense of hiding or feel the sense of downplaying at any point. Give it to us straight and narrow. We are mature enough, we can take it. So, I mean, grossly, that's kind of my sentiments around the event.
So we will need to check that too, if that was a truth that John Jinapor spoke about, because we had done 24 hours and there was nothing, and the new government had not brought in, as it were, one barrel of what was needed. And at the time he complained that we're going to face this. So the president has started speaking about a number of things, including the order, the instruction to the IGP to investigate the killings.
It's a big sigh of relief for some of us who have been talking about these things for a long time. And I agree that the conversation is not to re-engage the police, just to re-investigate, but in fact to audit the fact that this hadn't been done. These are Ghanaian lives which has been lost. And when we're talking about killings as well, we've talked about Ayawaso as well. I don't want us to only focus on killings that are connected with elections, even as important as they are. I'm talking also about Idra, for instance. Idra, that nothing was taken in the same vein. There was a commission and steps were not taken in connection with it. We are demanding for the president to look back into the Idra killings. We are demanding that the president look at the treatment of protesters under the former administration. We certainly at Democracy Hub are intending to petition Parliament on that and the presidency as well, that there must be an audit of the ways in which the police force and the security services were weaponized against Ghanaian citizens. That is also part of the reset, for us to trust again and believe that if we do our duties as active citizens, the state will not be weaponized against us. So those are some of the things that we are hoping that the president continues.
For people like you, how do you feel seeing the police act helpless in front of people who are, locking up offices and putting up conduct that is obviously criminal?
It's strange to me that some of the things that have happened in the past are repeating themselves. That there's almost a sense of the police feeling castrated in the face of political act of violence. And that's one of the things that perhaps they're reading the body language of politicians, but clearly this presidency is telling us that we're not going to do things as before. And I don't imagine that if the police were to take action, that the president would dissuade them from doing so. I don't want a police system where they have to wait on the presidency instructions to move ahead. Then we don't in fact have a police service. We have security services which serve at the pleasure of the executive. That is worrying to a democracy, I think.
Right. Interesting there. So if you want to make a quick, as it were, comment about what we have discussed as far as the inauguration is concerned, you have a minute to do so. We take a break. We return to talk about the botched presidential pardon. Office of the President issued a statement with names asking for consultation with the Council of State for the purposes of pardoning certain persons who have been convicted and are serving various jail terms in the America, in the United Kingdom, elsewhere. Presidents, particularly at the end of their term, they do these gifts during holidays in our country, during Christmas. This is done. It looks like this time round, that will not happen because the statement was issued. There was such a heavy public backlash, and another statement was issued from the presidency saying the president had not given any pardon. Well, what is the effect of what the president intended to do? And then after that, we will look at the Professor Stephen Kweku-Asare's petition for the removal of the Chief Justice, which the President, together with the Council of State, he tells us under the statement, under his signature, that they find that there's no merit in the petition and therefore is being dismissed. Is that the end of that petition? Right. Professor Botched, right, so we take a break, we return, and we go to the issue of the presidential pardon. Botched.
My comment on the botched?
No, we'll come back to that.
Okay,
right.
All right.
You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on Newsfile, as always, we put Ghana first. And my guests, you've been listening to Joyce Bawa-Muktari, Professor Kweku-Asare, Professor Kofi Abotchi, Oliver Bakavomowo, and Hajia Rabi Salifu. We will be joined shortly by Alfred Tuayeboa, former Deputy Attorney General, as we begin to talk about purely legal, constitutional matters. And let me share just a couple of your messages with you. And this one, Prince Henry says, fellow Ghanaians, let us support and have confidence in John Mahama to deliver and take us to the promised land. Ghana will be great again if we play our individual patriotic roles as citizens. I am a Ghanaian, I am Ghana, you are Ghana, and together we build the Ghana we want. Then Peter Doe Jr. says, what's more scared, intimidated, and dangerous to human life than live in Ghana under Akufo-Addo for 8 years? We heard from some security experts that that's how Ibrahim Traoré will appear at ceremony, considering many security threats he faces. That's how he will appear. Okay, so it should be excused. That's what you mean. Excellence Reign says, it's good John Mahama has taken this bold step to investigate the killings of innocent Ghanaians who were killed in the 2020 and 2024 elections. The people behind this must be held accountable for their action. This is also a test for the IGP. There was a petition to the Shraj by Okudzeto Ablakwa and some others. I think Emmanuel Kofi Boa was also part of it. And the Shraj wrote to the IGP for his comments because they were in charge of the Election Security Task Force for 2020 as well. The IGP wrote and told Shraj that Shraj could not investigate the matter because the matters were being prosecuted already. And right after the elections in 2021, the police issued a report, but that report was kept internal. It was private. They had actually said that 6 people were killed. And I have said, reading that report myself, I saw a lot of lame excuses that were offered there. And it doesn't appear they didn't do anything after that. And they left things to be the way they are. Until today, they are being asked to go into the matters and investigate them. Let's see how it goes. You remember that a court also had the opportunity to slam the Attorney General when it's suggested that they were only firing warning shots. And the court said that the use of lethal fire was not justified and that there was no basis for its use, leading to the killing of the 8 people. Right. Okay, let's see how it ends. Abdullahi Pagla Issa says that 60 ministers, including deputies, that's the promise. Your stammering this morning means that Mahama can't keep to this promise. The coming events cast their shadows. We are waiting. Then Sekou Nana Nkrumah says we need to privatize Electricity Company of Ghana. Okay, we have heard John Jinapo also suggesting that already. Then Baba Chairman in Tamale says John Jinapo and NDC must prepare to hit the ground running and not give us excuses. They made sweet promises to Ghanaians. They should just deliver them. Okay, thank you for those messages. We will return to a few more that you have been sharing on the subject matter that we have looked at. So, let's, Bright says that Mahama said in his speech that G7 nations GDP will be reduced to 29% in 2029, whilst the BRICS nations GDP have hit 39% in the world economy. Means Mahama will follow BRICS nations instead of G7? That's a question. Okay, thanks for your comments. Let's now go to the matter of the botched presidential pardon. This is normally supposed to be a very harmless process, and it is done during the holidays by presidents. You've heard about Trump issuing the pardons. Even Biden also had just issued pardons, including for his own son. So what was Akufo-Addo, what did he intend to do? And he issued that letter from his office under the hand of Ko Suman, the legal counsel to the president. And the list included William Atuesian, Philip Akpene Asibit, you remember him, on the matters in the previous administration that led to imprisonment, including Abuga Pele, who was also pardoned. Prof, following this matter, what will be your commentary?
Well, I think that the issue about presidential pardon generally is one that I find controversial. I have never really accepted that aspect of our constitution. I think that presidents should have no business pardoning people. When people are jailed or convicted in accordance with the judicial process, that should terminate it. And I do not think that presidents sitting in a political position should ordinarily be given that power. Historically, the reason kings and queens of England pardoned people were because the courts were the kings and queens' courts. And so they have essentially delegated their judicial authority to the courts. And so they could have the final say. And on ceremonial occasions, out of goodwill, they pardon people. Our constitution has sort of adopted that, in my opinion, without much historical context, unfortunately. We've been doing this over the years, and that's part of the problem that we have. So you have a president sitting ex cathedra who may not have much knowledge about the factual circumstances and even the whole trial process, deciding that out of goodwill I'm pardoning one person or the other. That is what leads to controversy if the president does not steep himself in adequate consultation and support. And that is why the Constitution says that the president shall consult. But we have seen this time and again when presidents have pardoned people who ordinarily ought not to be pardoned, so to speak. And then the contest and the controversy and the criticisms will come. I think we have a few examples in history. The current one, I would say that perhaps, but for one or two names that appears in there, or that appear in there, maybe this would have passed without people even knowing about it.
Yeah.
But those one or two names then implicate broader problems with the whole pardoning process. I'll tell you this. In the prisons, we have people who are on remand and who have been on remand for more than 5 years. In the past, I've witnessed more than 10 years. In respect of cases in which, had they even gone through the trial and been convicted, the penalty for the offense will not be up to the period they have already spent on remand. We have people in prison who clearly have been convicted improperly, and evidence has shown, subsequent evidence has shown, that they ought not be in prison. They are still in prison. We have people in prison who, as a result of ill health or other circumstances, as a result of other circumstances, as it were, they deserve consideration for pardon. We have people in prison who, by reason of a number of other extenuating factors, deserve pardon who ordinarily are not considered. The question is, what is the empirical basis? What is the research basis? Who has done some work to itemize those out of the political consideration, out of other, connected persons consideration, people who are connected to power, making these references? How do we insulate the pardon process from preferences that are unjustifiable, so to speak?
And on this list, there are few that reasons were not assigned for why they were in consideration for pardon. Akwesi Alhassan, number one, says he was convicted of murder and sentenced to death on the 19th of March, 1993. He has been in prison since then. That's 31 years. He's now serving life imprisonment per presidential order. That's the end of it. It doesn't say why he's being considered for pardon, whether he's had a transformative life or something. Beatrice Ofori, she was convicted of human trafficking on the 6th of June 2023, like recently, for 8 years with hard labor. She is currently 64 years, so that may be the consideration. Old and is seriously hypertensive. So the reason is given. This has affected both legs, leading to her inability to move freely. She spends most of her time in the prison infirmary. Then William Atuesian comes in. He was convicted for his role in the collapse of Capital Bank and sentenced to pay 90 million Ghana cedis. He defaulted after paying part of the money. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison in December 2023. He is suffering from severe life-threatening medical conditions and has undergone multiple surgeries as a result. Franco Bain, we are not told why he is being sought to be pardoned after he was sentenced for manslaughter. There's Stephen Nyako. We are not told why he is also being pardoned. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison in 2010. He's done 22 years. Philip Asibit. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison in 2018 for willfully causing financial loss to the state related to his role at the National Youth Employment Program. He has served 6 years in prison. He has pleaded to be released on the grounds of ill health. So that's how it goes.
Right. But I will argue that you have 10 times more the number of people on this list who reflect the same indices. The question is, why are they still in there? So it's important to broaden this. It's important to objectify it and take it out of the remit of the politicized environment in which usually it's been administered. And I will argue that the difficulty with this is that even though you've had explanation for someone, for example, like Atuesian, it's a difficult conversation for some people. And the reason is because the banking crisis, so to speak, is still ongoing.
That's right.
In fact,
with us.
President Mahama's speech reflected that's one area there will probably have to be some forensic investigation moving forward. Either his speech, or I think I saw it somewhere, among some of the things that he would do in the first couple of days or months or weeks in office.
120 days.
Right, 120 days in office. So that tells you that we have a situation that is still ongoing, and then we have culprits who are in the process of being pardoned. For some people, that was difficult to swallow. So I think that some of these things, you look at broader issues. I can understand the humanitarian consideration issues, such as the fact that, look, he's undergone medical conditions and medical treatments, and he's suffering from debilitating medical condition. These are humanitarian considerations, and they actually justify pardon. But the point I'm making is it's important to look at this broadly, holistically, more non-politically, and out of the whole political environment and the pressure that attends to this, because it undermines the effect of it. Even though I will go back to how I started, I generally am against pardons because they make no sense to the judicial process. If people are guilty, they serve the penalty. If they are not guilty and they are innocent, they shouldn't be there in the first place. I think it's important that we rather get the judicial process right instead of the political pardon that usually comes post-conviction.
Okay, so this letter that communicated this from the Office of the President, dated the 31st of December 2024, was to the chairperson of the Council of State and was copied to the Vice President and also copied to the Chief of Staff. And then the Communications Director of the Office of the President issued a statement on the 6th of January 2025, saying that the attention of the Office of the President has been drawn to reports circulating in sections of the media suggesting that the President of the Republic, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, has granted a presidential pardon to certain individuals. And he says, we wish to categorically state that these assertions are inaccurate and no pardon has been granted by President Akufo-Addo. The public is kindly urged to disregard any contrary information and rely on official communications from the Office of the President. It did not deny the letter from the presidency and the content of it signed by the legal counsel to the president. Of course, the terms of that letter was that it was going to the Council of State for consultations for these people to be released. Would you say that this has been botched, it's lost, or there's an opportunity for it?
Opportunity for who?
For the list to be treated in the manner that it was intended. The consultations from the Council of State, if they approved, maybe they don't approve all the people there.
The ultimate directive will have to go to the Director of Prisons, who's the custodian of these persons. Until then, they may be treated as notifications of kinds and notifications of intent. So I think the presidency or the ex-presidency was playing on words. And playing on words in the sense that we really haven't granted pardon. were asking the Council of State to say, okay, and then perhaps we'll go forward with that. Once they gauged the temperature and they realized the country's mood apparently wasn't in support, they quickly then played on words and said, look, truly we haven't granted pardons. We have taken note of the allegations that we have, but disregarded because we haven't. Yes. But the truth of the matter is that it appears that the process was about to finally unfold. And look at the date. This is on the 6th.
Yeah.
So there were actually very few hours left.
That's right.
And so I think as soon as the Council of State had okayed that, if they had, I'm sure the Director of Prisons would have been notified officially about the fact that these persons have been granted pardons. He should take appropriate note and grant the releases from the custody in which they have been kept.
Afretoye Yeboah will explain to us the status before midnight of the 6th of January 2026. So Afretoye Yeboah is joining us. Let's go to Professor Kukwasari. Prof, what's your assessment and commentary about their development?
Well, I really see this as, once again, government not telling us the truth. And Oliver mentioned the importance of truth-telling, and I highlighted why I liked Mohammed's emphasis on truth-telling. Without truth-telling, you create a trust deficit. Accountability is difficult to achieve, and democracy doesn't function very well. Before I go into the truth aspects, let me say that I have no problem with the pardon power, unlike Professor Abochi, because sometimes you need that. There can be miscarriage of justice. We shouldn't think that the judicial system is some perfect system. Sometimes there's miscarriage of justice, and a president has to come in to reverse that miscarriage. And then he mentioned compassion reasons. That's true. Rehabilitation. Sometimes even for national reconciliation. A good case in point is the pardon granted to Kwame Pianim, who was put in prison because allegedly he attempted to overthrow the PNDC regime, something that many of us thought was necessary. And so when we transitioned into democracy, it was important that somebody like Kwame Pianim would be pardoned. I have no problem with pardon power. Of course, if you are going to do pardoning and we are going to make sure that the people come along with it, then we must have some formal process. In many countries, they have a pardon committee, and people in prison can apply to the pardon committee. They follow processes, they interview them, and so on, and then they give recommendations to the president. In this particular case, the president truthfully on 6th January notified us that, well, he hasn't pardoned anyone, and so we should ignore reports that he has done so, which is true. But he doesn't really address the letter of December 31. The letter of December 31 says there's consultation going on between him and the Council of State. That was what he needed to address. Is there consultation going on? That was the issue. And then let me talk about this story of leakage, or this culture of leakage, because I myself have been falsely accused of leaking something. But here is another instance where there is a leakage from the presidency about communication between the president and the Council of State. Who leaked that letter? Was it a tri-balloon, the presidency itself trying to gauge the temperature of the country? Was it leaked by someone from the Council of State? Was it leaked by some internal staff at the Jubilee House? I mean, who leaked this thing?
It will be difficult to tell.
Of course, that's the point. And if it will be difficult to tell, you just don't accuse somebody in a formal document that we think there's a leakage. And in this Jubilee House where leakage is rampant, then we are accusing you of the leakage. And here's an example of a leakage, and we don't know who. I agree with you that we don't know who. That's exactly my point. Now, if this thing had been handled well, I mean, again, I wouldn't have seen any problem with pardoning. The problem here is that we are not being told the truth, and the process between the presidency and the Council of State somehow got out of kilter. Maybe it should have been done earlier. It wasn't.
You would not,
the last minute.
Prof, you would not have had any problem, including for people like Emmanuel Edu Mensah, who was convicted for narcotic offenses just in April of 2024. And you're asking, how does he get a pardon? There are many other convicts, people convicted of lesser offenses who are still in prison. Why is a narcotic offender being removed?
Well, I would have had a problem with that. And that's why I earlier said I would prefer there's a pardon committee that evaluates these issues. Nevertheless, merely because I would have had problems with it doesn't take away from the president's power to grant pardon. I mean, my recourse would have been through some, accountability. Of course, in this case, there will be none because he's going out of power anyway. But that is the nature of the pardon power. It always excites all kinds of emotions, not just in Ghana, but everywhere. In the US, people are crying about, well, why is Joe Biden giving his son pardon? Well, okay, because a president has the pardon power, and presidents can abuse the pardon power. It doesn't take away from the fact that they have the power. If you want to address that, let's put an intermediary structure in place, a pardon committee made up of notable people who take applications from whoever is in prison, they evaluate it, and they make recommendations to the president. But even if they make recommendations to the president, notice that the president can overrule, can add, and so on and so forth. Abuchi indicated the problems with pardons, and I have no problems with his articulation, but it is a power that is needed, and it's a power that can be abused. It's been debated for 1,000 years, and the debate won't end. Here, the problem we are having is what I described, that the president or the presidency was not telling us the truth, because if there's consultation going on, well, just tell us there's consultation going on, and maybe the Council of State decided, well, look, we don't agree to what you are trying to do, or maybe they ran out of time. Nobody knows, except that somebody leaked a letter from the presidency, and we don't know who did the leakage. The president comes to deny something that is not important, because what is important is the leaked letter. He doesn't address it, and then he goes off, and he's now an ex-president, so we never know the truth, and then that just increases the trust deficit. People then don't trust the government, because when the government is doing something, well, we never know. And Oliver mentioned, look, tell me the truth. Even if it is unpalatable, we are old enough, we are big enough, we can deal with it.
All right.
Here we are treated like children, we are given half-truths, and then, we try to make sense out of it. We never make sense out of it. And then trust in government just continues to decline.
Oliver, what do you make of the development? And some say this gives you an idea that the presidency really didn't mean well, because some of the releases, the intended releases, are so questionable.
Samson, I agree. I do not think that ordinary Ghanaians are concerned that a 62-year-old man who is almost an invalid was being considered for pardon. I'm aware also of several people who are in dire humanitarian conditions in the prisons who are deserving of attention. And these are people who were deprived of change systematically of a fair shot at the president's mercy. That's the crisis at the heart of this. But on the other hand, the exercise of the power of prerogative, or the prerogative of mercy, particularly for politicians and persons accused of financial crimes against the Republic, has not been without controversy under the Fourth Republic, particularly with regard to the perceived fairness, the irregular use or the political justifications of some of them. So the questions really go into the assessment that go into it and the information that that accompany them. You have talked, for instance, about the letter that was sent to the Council of State. It is without an accompanying dossier, from what I understand. And without that, on what basis are they given are they being consulted on? What is the processes that has led the president to confirm an illness, for instance, even if it's a humanitarian condition, so that we know that it's a view which is a condition which is expressed in earnest. So you can't just give people a list and say, convicted of this, sick, so release, and say, I'm consulting some of the highest, senior-most officials this country has put together in the Council of State, and we think that is proper. But one of the things I have said on this question is that, particularly on the question of Atuisian, for instance, it goes to question the president's commitment around holding people accountable for something that we spent so much of our money on. So many, he's in fact the only individual, unless I'm corrected on this, who has seen jail on the issue. I remember that even the question of his refunding the money and escaping jail was a huge issue that divided Ghanaians.
That's right.
Has to be able to pay your way out of jail. So to see that less than a year or a year on, he's been released on pardon, it showed that people did not believe there was in fact a commitment to hold anybody accountable for the incident. But one of the things I want to draw attention to in thinking about how we reform it going forward. One, let's think under the Fourth Republic generally. If you take President Kufuor and the Chakachikata pardon, for instance, that was not without its own controversies, right? You remember Chakachikata famously rejecting the pardon and then had to be forcibly thrown out of jail. But then the court held that even he didn't compromise his right to appeal and he was able to clear his name.
Yeah.
It was the incident of Dana Budakpi. I think a lot of people have forgotten that the sitting MP was jailed for 10 years. And that Dana Budakpi, after a year in jail, was then pardoned by Kufuor and came back into Parliament to resume his seat. Right? That was a hugely divisive issue again in our republic as to persons feeling that he was unnecessarily victimized to send a message and then given a pardon. If we continue to exercise the power in so much controversy, it will create distrust. We have President Mahama with the Montier 3 incident, for instance, which is also a big issue as to whether or not the president should have pardoned the Montier 3. Just like Abu Dhabi's case, we was challenging.
Well, as we understand, that kind of pardon was part of why Ghanaians punished the NDC.
Yeah, that's...
You know, I've heard that said so many times. Our friend Mami Mensah has published an article on this, where she actually questions this, that in the commentary relating to the elections, it didn't come up towards the election as to people's top reasons why the NDC lost. But some people continue to hold their view. But I think that in written into the exercise of the presidential pardon is the idea that the voters must have a chance to also have their say on it. And if that's why they punish the presidency, I think for fair reason. But one of the things that case does damage to, when it was challenged, there were 3 petitions, and I'm happy Alfred Tuyayeboa is here. He, Elikuri Magwava, and Bedu to Asante, challenged this in the Supreme Court that the cases were consolidated. One, the Supreme Court said that the presidency was not required to publish any regulations under Article 296 as to how it is governed. And so it could just be done anyhow. And that the consultation with the Council of States was sufficient. Well, we've seen what that consultation is. It's a piece of letter which says nothing. But also importantly, the case reduces the effect of what advice again is, which is part of the consistent way in which we obstruct or undermine ways in which we can check the presidency, and we give the presidency consistent passes. That even when you are said to act in accordance with, we said the operative word is advice, and advance means you can do whatever you like. And we forget act in accordance with something. So those are some of the instances in our democracy where when the opportunity has arisen to put in more a formalized control process or to put structures on power, we have failed to do so.
Okay.
I'm hoping for 2 things. One, that there's a proper parole system that exists in place. So under the Prison Service Act, there's an automatic remission of sentences, which I think is 1/3, that applies to everybody generally. But there's no process for when, persons under long sentences, offenders under long sentences or humanitarian reasons can be considered by a parole board and released, on good behavior that is mainstreamed into the process that enhances the fairness of our prisons. Almost everybody is sick in our prisons because the conditions are uncertain.
That's right.
And so that's something that we need that's the part of equity and justice that we need to mainstream. I still believe that there's some sort of regulations, whether it's a constitutional instrument or legislation, must put in place a formalized process. And I like the idea that Professor Sari was suggesting, that people appear before some pardon committee or board and that people have a chance to be able to plead their case to show that they have reformed or they have genuine humanitarian conditions, that the president does not need this kind of controversy. And it doesn't help us in the long run, I think.
Right. Interesting there. I'm coming to Joyce Bauer. But before I do that, Prof, the appointment of Dominic Ayine, you have already started a crusade. And you are saying that one of his first brief will be to go to the court and file a nolli prosequi for Jachi Kwesin. Correct?
Is that to me?
Yes.
Well, yeah. Well, I say that in a light-hearted way because I think Jachi Kwesin's prosecution, Oliver Bakavamawo, I think he's on trial for treason, felony, and maybe some other ones that I can't even recall.
Coup on Facebook
case is on appeal. Jakpe's case also is on appeal. Opuni's case, Agongo's case. To me, all of these are going to end, whether or not there is a nolli prosequi, because obviously it will be no attorney general under this regime will continue that prosecution. So yes, right. I say that in a light-hearted way, just to make fun of the system.
Okay, you say it on a light-hearted manner. Some of us don't take it on a light-hearted with a light-hearted approach. Dominic Ayine, once it's approved,
because my point is the prosecutions.
Yeah, I get it.
Discontinued. Yes,
I get it. My hope was that the Attorney General, the President, would have instructed him, seeing what was going on, to file nolli prosequi for these cases, which are, clearly in a certain manner, but didn't do it. That opportunity would have been nice on him, but he didn't do it. So Dominic Ayine, once he's done and sworn in, the first day he begins his work is go to Jachi Kwesin's court and put in the nolli prosequi, get him out, Oliver Bakavoma off, because these were really, well. So what do you say about this botched prosecution, pardons?
I believe that I would like to, on this one, take a cue from Professor Abuchi. He's an expert in constitutional matters. I believe he's expressed his very personal views on the matter. But, be that as it may, and to agree also with the fact, and I think that you have put it very succinctly yourself, that, in that matter of the contemnos, the Munchie 3 in particular,
right.
Maybe I'm one of those very few people, after reading Mami's, piece on that, and reading the judgment all over again yesterday, I am inclined to believe that for many, many, many reasons, that was actually one of the reasons why we lost, and lost in the manner in which we did. I genuinely believe it. I know that a lot of people probably stopped thinking about it and not much was said about it, and maybe because it was also such a sensitive matter, most people really didn't want to talk about it. And if you recall, at the time of the nomination of Professor Nana Jane, if you remember, it came up again. And I am convinced that, look, it was politically expeditious for us to do so under the circumstances. There may even have been schools of thought that actually approved of the fact that President Mahama really had no options. And now that the late Vice President is not with us, maybe I'm no longer bound by the conversations that actually took place. Know that he was actually strongly opposed to the grant of pardon to the contemnors in that matter. And the Supreme Court spoke at length about it, expressed their angst, and on this one it was very personal in many ways in that particular ruling. And I know that there are still many people who are out there and still thinking the same. Deep down, beyond the legalities and the constitutional aspects of it, I ask a question sometimes. They were young men, okay? First-time offenders. This was a politically very charged atmosphere. I look back on it now. What did they do and say that Wontumi TV and all these other very, very vociferous individuals have not done? So yes, look, be that as it may, I'm delighted that in the final analysis, President Akufo-Addo probably even disowned his own attempt. But this is something that is granted and steeped in the Constitution. And the president has the discretion and the latitude so to do. But Samson, prison reforms are very close to my chest, because there's a young man that I've actually been mentoring over the years, languishing in jail for a crime that was just to put food on his table. And I believe that all of us as lawyers must, now that we have a new government in place, work very hard to review our prisons for that matter. The sentences, the sentencing, the lack of representation in some cases, even the fact that sometimes they're even forgotten over a very long period
On remand, not that they have been convicted.
No, there is no conviction, there's nothing. You know, they keep remanding them and suddenly it becomes lost in the system. The biggest part is prison infrastructure. Just look at what we have. This is even a good one. Go into the prisons and look at the diseases.
And remember, they are fed on less than 2 cedis a day.
Please, even that one doesn't go.
1 cedi, 80 pesos.
Yes, absolutely. Look,
that's for the whole day. Three meals.
Appalling conditions in our prisons in the entire country. You know, we want people to go through a reformative process, okay? We want people to be, you know, retrained and reintegrated into society. But to be honest, when people leave our prisons, they become even more hardened in the crimes or whatever it is that took them there. I think that this is another thing that we want to put at the doorstep of the new administration. And I am delighted that at this time, a very progressive lawyer is coming into the space as a substantive Attorney General. And I know that these are matters that we will continue to discuss as we go along. You know, as President Akufo-Addo and his botched attempt and all of that, you know, this matter of these banks, speaking about the Mr. Atoisian in particular, we all know that there were many other people. It is a matter that, you know, there's so many other facets to this issue. And, you know, these are things that, to be honest, they break my heart, and I don't want to put too much premium on it. Whether he has withdrawn it, whether he has not, and all of these things are matters of public record.
The view is that the Asian took the fall for others?
Oh, I believe that too. I believe that too. I believe that too. He may not have been necessarily, we kind of absolve him of all, you know, of all our crimes or inactions or whatever. But there were many other people, many other fishes in the same pond. And it's unfortunate that he alone would take the fall for all of them. But yes, we don't want also to speak into the remit of matters that should actually be within the remit of the courts or the judicial system. But I am hopeful that the Attorney General will be very busy over the next few months, over the next few weeks. There are many of these matters that need to be looked at again. The issues of nolle prosequi and some of these matters, for example, you've spoken about the matter to do with SNF. I mean, have you not watched, even with the challenges to do with the Electoral Commission, with some of the results and the collation, look at how the NDC has handled these matters. Beyond the other issues that have come up in terms of some fallouts and some acts of duress, etc., that people have complained about, we have actually submitted to the processes of court in these matters. We've actually gone to court even on many occasions to try and even get some of these members of parliament that we believe won the seats as we expected. But we are actually going through the process. And so I think that in a democracy also, we must also always remember that even though the wheels of justice may always grind sometimes very slowly, it is still the best that we have. And so whatever it is that we do within what it is we expect, let's remember that the rights even of all these people who are incarcerated, some against their will, are also human rights that also ought to be protected.
All right.
And let's hope that as we go along, we will see such progressive things come up. But you know, please, Prof, as for the need for presidents to have a certain latitude, I believe that the framers and drafters of the Constitution had very good reasons. You know, these ones were pardons that were even expected to be applied to white-collar crimes, you know, certain type of political crimes, etc. As a daughter of somebody whose father served a year at Nsawam because of politics, I believe that many of those people at some point would have been expecting these pardons. So there were very good reasons why this was actually given as part of the discretions that the president is allowed. The question is that we have fortunately not even been abusing them. And whenever there's abuse also, they have recourse even to go back to the courts for interpretation.
All right.
So I think these are some things that...
Can I
let me go to Alfred Choyebua.
Yes, I would actually want to hear his views on this matter.
Let me go to Alfred Choyebua.
Then also in pocket law.
Yes, Alfred, thanks very much for joining us.
Good morning, Samson.
Great to have you. So we have been wondering what exactly has been going on, that The presidency issues this letter on the 31st. It is going to Council of State, and the list of people to be pardoned, including people who have just been put in only how many months ago, in April of 2024, narcotic offenses. People are not excited about SCN and so on and so forth. And then a letter comes in, and then what? That's it. End of the story. People are saying the president, it tells you the president's mind that he didn't mean well if these are the classes of people that attract his attention for pardon.
Thank you very much. Now, Samson, if we take a look at Article 72 of our Constitution, it gives every president the power to pardon people who have been convicted.
Alfred, hold on briefly for me, because I was supposed to do this, that there's some development that we need to get national attention to, and for some action to go to Ejura, because there has been some youth who have not been happy with the youth, and they have gone on rampage. They have free suspects on remand, and they have set the police station on fire. They've set it alight, and that's what you are looking at right now. So I suppose that national security clearly will be aware of this going on right now. Maybe there's a need for escalating the intervention that is required. Where are these people now? They just did this. What is it exactly? So we are finding out, and we will update you on why some youth in Ejura reportedly are the ones behind this, that they went on a rampage, they freed suspects on remand, and then decided to set the police station alight. Right. So we'll be following it and update you. Yes, Alfred, let's hear you.
All right. Yes, so I was talking about Article 72 that gives the president the right to pardon people who have been convicted and sentenced to zero prison term. Former President Akufo-Addo was the president of Ghana from January 7, 2017 until 7 January 2025. And so it is true that on 31st of December, a letter was written to the Council of State, pursuant to the provisions in Article 72(1) of the Constitution, to consult them on various petitions that the President had received from some convicts. Now, if you look at the list, as I was monitoring the discussion this morning, it appears 2 individuals whose name appeared in the list actually ignited this kind of public interest in the whole process. Otherwise, since 1993, all presidents have exercised this power under the Constitution. And listeners and viewers will recall that acting as a citizen in 2016, I sued the Attorney General in respect of the monetary pardon. And the argument was not that the president didn't have the power to pardon for all offenses, but I limited my argument to contempt when people are convicted for contempt. Now back to the issue under consideration. These individuals submitted petitions. Those petitions were vetted. And then, because the president couldn't sit at the Jubilee House on his own to pardon people, submitted a letter to the Council of State. The Council of State on the 2nd of January actually did meet the president as part of the consultation process. And at the end of the consultation, it was decided that these people should not be pardoned. So that's how come when news started coming around that the president had pardoned these individuals, the president had issued a statement to indicate to the public that no such a decision had been taken by the president.
So the Council of State had advised, you are saying that the Council of State had advised that none of the individuals on the list should enjoy a pardon?
not advised, but the Council of State consulted with the President. And this one is about in consultation with.
Mm-hmm.
So the President consulted the Council of State, and at the end of the day, the decision was taken that these people should not be pardoned. That's what I can say for now.
And this was on the 2nd of January?
On the 2nd, yes. But unfortunately, on the 6th, the letter that was forwarded to the Council of State was leaked. And instead of most people, including, some media personnel, taking time to look at that letter, decided to come to conclude that the President had pardoned some people, because that letter was clearly a letter that the President had sent to the Council of State as part of the consultation process. And so for now, those individuals are still in prison custody.
Isn't it strange that there was a blanket rejection of the entire list? Isn't it strange? And this happened, on the 2nd?
Yes, that's a consultation process, because the President will have to consult the Council of State. And in that consultation process, the decision was reached that the pardon that they were requesting for should not be granted, and same was denied. But Samson, when it comes to consultation and advice, we've been told by the Supreme Court that the President is not bound by advice or the consultation, the advice that the people that he's supposed to consult may give you. So the President could have just gone his way to say, despite the consultation I've had, I may want to, on my own, exercise my power to grant. But the President says no. So far as consultation has gone on, and there is a decision not to pardon, he was not going to pardon them, and he didn't do so. So currently, that's the state of this letter that has been circulating.
Were you surprised? Were you surprised when you heard many people ask, why is Gregory Afoko not on that list? Why was he not in consideration at all? He had done a trial, it was over, then he gets back in a bizarre manner, he's back on trial again, and people have been expecting that he could enjoy the pardon as well.
He is not a convict. He is still an accused person on remand.
That's right.
So he could have taken advantage of the powers of the President and Article 72 of the Constitution. So that's the reason why his name couldn't be featured in the list.
That's a good one for him. What do you say to others who suggest that, this very old woman, 64 years, and who is seriously hypertensive and has been spending her time only at the prison infirmary, has done 8 years, of prison in hard labor. She was convicted for human trafficking on the 6th of June 2020. She's not done 8 years. She was convicted on the 6th of June 2023 to be in prison for 8 years. The Council of State did not consider her too. Hello, Mr. Chuaibwa.
Hello, yes, Samson.
Yes, the 64-year-old woman, she was found not to be deserving by the Council of State?
Not that she was not found to be deserving. The Council of State had this kind of consultation process with the President, and the decision was taken not to pardon. I don't want to isolate individuals on the list, because the fact that President Akufo-Addo did not pardon all of them, that's something that the sitting president can also not go ahead to do. So that's why I don't want us to come to that conclusion that he is deserving or he is not deserving. The decision was taken that they should not be pardoned. But if the sitting president also receives petition from them again and examines and consults the Council of State, they come to the conclusion that they deserve to be pardoned, and that too can be done.
Okay. Let me check if any of my guests want to ask you a question or want to say a quick thing, having listened to you. Anyone? Having listened to Chuaibwa? You want to ask anything or you want to say something?
Well, not to ask, but I mentioned something about those on remand.
On remand, yeah.
Now, it's imperative that for those on remand, as he rightly said, those are not convicts, so they can't be pardoned because pardon is reserved for convicts. However, those on remand, the executive reserves prosecutorial discretion, which has to do with novel procedure. It's also as simple And so we can simply just enter a nolle prosequi for persons who have been on remand for more than 5 years. I mean, for goodness sake, nobody should be on remand for that long. And indeed, the Constitution itself says that when a person has been on remand for so long and the trial is not ending early, the person should be considered the option of being granted bail. But often we don't exercise that. So I think prosecutorial discretion should be exercised here, and those persons released by way of a nolle prosequi have been entered if the prosecution simply cannot conclude.
Okay.
That could be equivalent to pardon in this
Right, Rabbi.
Yes, Samson, I'm too happy.
Yeah, and very brief, so we go to the next subject. Yeah.
Not technical, of course. I'm not expected to
That's
talk
all right.
legally. But the social aspect of it is what got me, especially the issue of constituting a committee. Learning from the point of the Muntie theory, if consultation was done broadly, like my sister admitted, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't have lost some votes that is being perceived to have been lost through that or the limited consultation. Also on Prof's position of checking through or maybe even vetting to know who is really qualified to be granted this kind of pardon is also a very good thing to consider, considering health, considering age, especially that of the woman we are
There's a prison council. I think normally it comes from all of that. The petitions go to...
Okay.
Yeah.
So though I'm a politician, I would also want to say, moving forward, that should be taken critically without party colors or political consideration. The social aspect is really dear to me. And then also finally, what my sister said about rehabilitation, ex-convict. Are you coming back to be a better person to the society, or you are coming to be a more hardened?
Right, we have to move on now. Thank you very much. If you're still here with us, and I believe you are, as it happens always, every Saturday, Newsfile, top in the trends. And we are receiving all the tons of messages you are sharing, but forgive us that we can't share all of them. And we want to say good morning to all of you listening on KTU Radio. KTU Radio, that should be in Koforidua, right? Thanks for listening this morning. You joined us as early as 8 a.m. when we start the show. KTU Radio in Koforidua. Thank you very much. Now, let's go to the next matter of the petition. But before we do that, let me bring in Professor Kwaku Asare for if he has any final comments to make before he goes. Professor Kwaku Asare, on a principle stance, is not going to make any comment on the petition. Yes, Prof, if you have any final comments to make, so you can take leave of us.
Yeah, my final comment is thanks for having me, and I hope you guys have a fruitful conversation on the next topic. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So he is the one who says that he doesn't want to comment on this matter for some very good reasons, because I'll end it there. Let me not say more. Right, thanks very much. And as I understand it, the presidential power of pardoning is not reserved for only convicted persons. President Ford pardoned President Nixon even before he was charged with impeachment. Prof, yeah.
Well, our constitution is not...
This coming from somebody who had something to do with this list.
Oh, okay.
Right, but I'm saying our constitution is not the American Constitution. Both by practice and by the wording of the Constitution as I understand it, the expectation is that you should have gone through the process. You should have been convicted. I can't remember if anybody was convicted who was still who was still going through the process. You see, our system may defeat that perception because, like I said, pre-conviction is executive, and then conviction is judicial. So before you're convicted, you are in the hands not of the court, unless you're on remand. Until you're convicted, you are in the hands of the executive by way of the Justice Ministry and the police, for example.
Right, you are not in the hands of the...
You're not in the hands of the court.
Right.
You're not owned by the court. When you are convicted, you are owned by the court per the conviction, but you quickly transition into the
back into the executive.
No. Well, back into the executive. You're right. Back into the executive.
Right.
And once you transition to the executive, well, maybe this justifies the argument Professor Kukwasari was making that in that context you have the executive's participation.
Right.
My only reason, and I'm not persuaded with all respect, but my only reason for being against pardons is because I still think that we should rather fix the judicial system. For when people are justly convicted, there will be no need for pardons.
Okay. In the UK, the process is so stringent, and they don't do it. They hardly do it. They rarely do it. And it goes through a certain stringent process. I hope that we're able to get there. What about this petition from Professor Kukwasari to the President for the removal of the Chief Justice, Gertrude Araba Esaba Tokono? And the President says, together with the Council of State, they have made a determination, prima facie, as required by the law, to look on the face of the document that, in fact, if it has any substance, and they have come to the conclusion that it is frivolous, it is vexatious, and it doesn't have any merit. So they've thrown it out. Justice Sophia Kufu, former CJ, doesn't think that our Constitution actually is made in a way that gives us room to be able to deal with impeachments like this one the way it ought to be. Listen to her.
In just the last few days before the expiration of his term, during President Akufo-Addo's tenure, we had a professor of law, for instance, Professor Kukwasari, then asking for the removal of the Chief Justice.
It's not even, let's not even use the word removal, because you need to do, before you reach removal, you're going to go through an impeachment process, which must be whereby you must follow the dictates of the Constitution. Now, personally, I don't think the provisions of the Constitution are adequate for the purpose of impeachment of anybody. In the current arrangement, you petition the President, and in the case of the Chief Justice, the matter is referred to the Council of State, which has to go through certain processes. And it's not just a question of, I want to remove this person, and then it goes to Council of State, and then Council of State comes back and says, yeah, we agree with you, go ahead and do it. There has to be due process. Even in the lower court, there are processes that must be followed. But so you can send in your petition. It's not just by an appeal to the President or whatever. You need to send a petition, and the petition must set out some reason. That's part of what due process is all about. So I'm not in the country, and I've not really been following that aspect of the matter. I know that such a call has been made, but I'm yet to know what the justifications are that the petitioner has given for asking the removal of the Chief Justice. But right. It's not that easy, even under the Constitution as it is now.
Right, so let me begin with Oliver. So in the President's prima facie determination, among others, some have condemned it and criticized it as half assessment, that it didn't do a good job with it, and that there is obvious prejudice from the very start. At least you begin with, from page one, you hear about leakage and why all of that is bad. And Professor Kukwasari is referred to as a self-acclaimed advocate for good governance, who is interested in resorting to public theatrics. And actually there was an expectation of an apology for leakage of the petition. So they make a conclusive statement that he who brought the petition leaked it, and so on. Let's hear your assessment of the prima facie determination.
Yeah, thank you for that. Before I go into the substance of the determination itself, I want to make a quick comment about what I see to be some sort of inconsistent practice and procedure around the issue of the prima facie case itself. So we know that generally in law, the prima facie case ought to be established on the basis of what you have presented only, right? But the practice for the removal of other justices and other officials, I call them generally Article 146 officials, is that the Chief Justice has taken the position to ask them to submit a response to them. And so that's where you usually have the right to the people and ask them to send a response.
I can confirm that because I have done that process before. And when my client, we submitted our petition for the removal of Charlotte for Loretta Lamptey. Yeah.
Now there are two.
The Loretta Lamptey was asked to present her response. In Kisie Jaben's matter, he was asked to present a response. Yeah. In Charlotte and the others, they were asked to present responses. Yeah.
And let's make two distinctions. So there's the Article 1464 process,
right,
which applies to everybody else under the article, and the 1466, which applies to the Chief Justice. Now, the Supreme Court told us that under 1464, there's a prima facie requirement that is written into the Constitution, and that we should apply same to 1466. But when it comes to how we have operationalized the removal of the Chief Justice, the presidency at no point called on the Chief Justice to present a response to the petition that has been filed. So there's some inconsistency in practice and procedure within that article itself that ought to be looked at. Secondly, the biggest challenge I've had from time and time again is that we have seen, and I think you've made allusion to this in the past, almost all presidents under the Fourth Republic either refuse to forward petitions or undertake that prima facie assessment.
That's right.
And it is these situations that have created, perhaps in certain petitioners, a desire to elicit the public support and putting pressure on the office to do what is constitutionally required. Now, obviously, I have disagreed with the idea of the publishing the content of the petition, but I take the point that the law is that you don't publish it. But I'm also a bit challenged as to now we are stretching it to say that even the fact that the petition has been made should not be disclosed. It shouldn't be known to the public.
But publishing it does not defeat the substance of the petition. The court also says so.
Yes.
Right.
Now, the courts have taken that view more generally. Now, let's go to the president's response. First of all, and you've pointed out in the beginning, I am dismayed by the absence of a maturity of tone in the way in which the exercise is supposed to be conducted. It was completely improper for the presidency to dissolve into a process where they are calling the petitioner names. I think that is uncalled for. Unfortunately, we had seen that tone of communication from the presidency, even in the case of Domelevo, for instance, where aspersions was cast on his person, was called the Togolese. It was just a combative nature in the way in which the communications were made. I think that the prima facie determination is a sober process that requires that neither the president or the Council of State descend into the arena of conflict by some of the things that were said. So the aspersions cast on the petitioner are unfortunate. There was absolutely no basis to call him so-called advocate at some point purporting to represent good governance. It's the language they used. Or even the accusation that he leaked the petition. I feel, at the very least, if you feel constrained by that you write to the petitioner and say that we have seen this in the public domain, if you are so certain that this leak did not come from the presidency, and to offer the petitioner a chance to comment, to write that the petitioner should have sent you an apology, and that the failure to send the president an apology, I honestly, really did not think that was something that history would look back on, that kind of language should have found its way into it. But there are a number of analysis that was done here that I don't think necessarily is consistent with law. One, on the question, for instance, that the petition, one of the aspects of the petition was that the Chief Justice placed the hearing of cases involving some parties before the same High Court in the dispute, I think, Daniel Oforian and Ekoban. The conclusion, it seems, was that it is within the Chief Justice's administrative remit to do so, and for which reason it cannot be questioned. But we know clearly that in the J-Chum, for the decision, the Supreme Court decision in J-Chum, that this issue came up. That in that case, the allegation had been that the then Chief Justice had instructed 3 Circuit Court justices, Opon, Antama, and Chairman, to rule a certain way. And it was argued to the court that the Chief Justice was performing an administrative function and could not be questioned. And Justice Dateban said absolutely not. That the fact that this was the case cannot be an issue. But also importantly, the presidency says the judges that Professor Asari was referring to had, or the victims in that case, have a remedy in law. And so they could have appealed or done other things. In J-Chum, the court was clear that the fact that an alleged victim of an administrative act of the Chief Justice would have a remedy does not mean that, or is not a substitute for a procedure for making the Chief Justice accountable for the performance of their duty as Chief Justice. So it cannot be a basis to say that Professor Asari was not himself involved in it, and those who were affected by it could themselves have found other remedies. The law is clear on that. Now, reading the response, one of the things that I struggled with is what is the exact legal standard that was being applied to judge the petition. So in one breath, the presidency says the prima facie determination requires that the president takes all the allegations as true and proceed from there. It would seem that if you're taking it as true, the conclusion would be, if it is true, would it still lead to proof of incompetence or stated misbehavior? But that's not what they do. They abandon that truth point and in fact go on and attack the petition as being a collection of conjectures and that the statement that he has produced were factually untrue. Then it means that you're going beyond the standard and you're doing the work which is reserved from the committee to evaluate evidence. So that's one of the things that I find.
You are suggesting that the prima facie determination did the job that the actual committee that would have done the inquiry did. Is that what you are suggesting?
Yes. So the inquiry goes into the weighting of evidence. It is not the presidency's role to do that. If you are taking something as true, the conclusion would be, if taken as true, would these facts as true lead to a conclusion that the Chief Justice has been incompetent or has misbehaved? I do not know how. Again, I am not going to speculate as to what the committee should do, but I do not know how an allegation that the Chief Justice was involved in transferring and changing judges and moving them at will and at displeasure because she wanted to influence the outcome of those cases, if taken as true, can lead us to a conclusion that that's not misbehavior.
But they said that the president says, yes, prima facie, they are supposed to look at what is being presented to them on the face, but there is also the need to have attached some evidence. And Prof didn't attach even one simple evidence to help them do their work. So the president then took time where Professor Asari spoke about matters that he didn't have evidence to show. The president then took time to explain to Professor Asari. For example, in the question of the nomination of the judges, extra judges for the processes of bringing them to the Supreme Court, the president took Professor Asari through the process, how these had gone on in a transparent manner and so on. But Prof came without any evidence. But the president had the evidence that this is the process that went on and the Chief Justice did nothing wrong.
So I would make a brief comment on that particular issue and I'll come to the larger question of evidence, okay? So on this particular issue, this is one of the reasons why if the presidency had proceeded with the benefit of a response from the Chief Justice, they would be better placed to take that response for what the Chief Justice says. Here you are descending into the arena of conflict by providing explanation on behalf of the individual. And that explanation, I'm not even entirely convinced, satisfies the issues that have been raised. One, the letter the Chief Justice wrote to the presidency said to the president that these are the individuals I am presenting to you to nominate to the Supreme Court. The presidency said, I only asked the Chief Justice for a brief of some discussion that had happened. There was no summary of a report. There was nothing in that letter that shows that it was a feedback on some process that had happened. but you are substituting your own response here for the Chief Justices. And if that's the case, the Chief Justice is competent to be able to say exactly why the Chief Justice wrote that letter. And I'll come to the broader question of that letter itself subsequently. On the question of evidence, and this is some of the things I want us to talk a bit about, because Samson, you have written an extensive guide on Article 146 process. And one of the things I loved about that guide was that you talked about the inquisitorial process itself. One of the key takeaways for me here is that it seems that at the prima facie hurdle, we have an adversarial process. And then later this will dissolve into an inquisitorial process. My concern then is the inconsistency in this. Because what we do, we know with an adversarial process is that it can discount the likelihood that the evidence that may be necessary can only be elicited under subpoena. And in fact, when you read the petition, the petitioner says that there are certain justices who will be subpoenaed. 2, that the person whose character is being impugned may hold evidence which is crucial to the assessment of their misconduct. You cannot produce that at the petition stage. And if you are being required to do so now, then no petition will progress to the later stages. And if you haven't been involved in the process, you know then that in that process, there's the petition for witness statement, there's cross-examination. That's when evidence is examined. So if you are bringing that, you are front-loading that process now, you are creating an impossible task where critical issues will not be addressed. So even buttress this point, if you remember the decision in the J2, and perhaps I want to quote here, what's the reasons why the Supreme Court felt fortified in saying that there must be a prima facie determination is because it agreed with the second defendant who made this point, and I'll quote, it said, it would be the height of naivety to assume that the president in popular parlance just got up and set up a committee without satisfying himself that there's a prima facie case against the Chief Justice. The president is a lawyer of over 30 years standing at the bar. He knows and understands the essence of a prima facie case. And to satisfy himself, the president has competent and well-established national and investigative institutions capable of assisting him to satisfy himself, to satisfy the Council of State, and that the allegations establish a prima facie case. The president has the BN9, the police, the Serious Fraud Office, the National Security, Military Intelligence, and the Attorney General's Office to help him establish a prima facie case before deciding to establish the Committee of Inquiry. It seemed to me the suggestion here is that the Supreme Court was also extending that need for an inquisitorial process to this level. And so, therefore, if the president has received information that the Chief Justice has done X, Y, Z, if you had received a response from the Chief Justice as to the reasons, if you felt inclined to go even into reasons, you would then have been satisfied or otherwise. But I'm worried that we will create an impossible standard at the barrier here, which it will become convenient for presidents to not do assessment that is required or do more than is required, for which reason we discount the process.
I'm sorry, but for lack of time, I need to come to the studio here. If you can, in the next minute, wrap up for us and tell us, so it's over. I mean, this one too is gone.
What do you mean this one too is gone?
Like it's over, like the prisoner pardon letter.
Well, I to be honest, one petition doesn't.
Or I should have said it is finished.
The accountability standards to which we hold the Chief Justice going forward. I mean, that has to be clear. But I am more concerned about due process, whether it has been. I don't think it has. But I want to make one last comment on this, even this issue of this letter issue, which I reserve for the last. When the president has determined that prima facie case has not been made, it is not conclusive of how we, the general public, morally assess the Chief Justice's conduct and its impact on the esteem of the judiciary. For instance, I do not think it should be considered proper that the Chief Justice will place himself in a perilous position of writing directly to the president to ask for certain judicial colleagues to be appointed to the Supreme Court. I consider this to be gravely improper and lacking good judgment. In fact, one of the things it does is that it undermines the central authority of the Judicial Council. Secondly, the question of court packing is a deeply contentious issue.
That's on the presumption that the CJ is doing it without, the Judicial Council's input. Well, the
Judicial Council is a body
CJ chairs the Judicial Council,
right? And so when the Chief Justice is writing, she's writing with the authority of her office as Chief Justice, and everything she does cannot be assumed to be the act of the Judicial Council.
All right. I'm sorry, but I need to move on here into the studio. And please forgive me about that. Time was running and we didn't pay attention. Yes, Prof, what do you make of the prima facie determination and end of the road for the petitioner, isn't it?
The Constitution doesn't even mention the expression prima facie. The Supreme Court, as Oliver said, has inserted that. But there's a reason for that. And the reason, I think, is because of the enormity of any allegation against the office of the Chief Justice. The Chief Justice's office is an office which is heavily steeped in perceptual efficiency. If people don't perceive it in a good light, it affects the overall administration of justice. So the expectation is that we shouldn't allow rampant and, so to speak, fallacious allegations against the Chief Justice to just be taken seriously and go through the investigative process. I suspect that's why the Supreme Court inserted the expression as a mandatory requirement of Article 1466. But having said that, I do think, and again I see Oliver's point of perspective, the presidency has the panoply of investigative bodies. I don't even think, and I do not agree with that part of what he said in terms of the fact that the president could have invited the Chief Justice to respond. I don't think in the determination of prima facie cases, a response usually is necessary.
But they have always demanded a response
right,
from the CJ when she has to determine prima facie before a committee is set up.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's necessary. All right. Because the determination of a prima facie case, usually in law, is a determination of a factual basis to an allegation. In fact, in the case of Kwache and Attorney General, that's what the court said. That look, if you make allegations of, if you make allegation on the existence or otherwise of a fact, you have to provide a factual basis to your allegation. So if, for example, the president has the BNI and the police service, the intelligence bodies and all that, and there's a way of doing background check to ascertain the veracity, the facial veracity, it's facial, that's why it's facie. Prima facie, that's primary fact, the basis, the facial justification for an allegation. Once we come to a conclusion that there appears to be a basis for the allegation, a prima facie case has or may have been established. So even the Chief Justice being called upon to write may not be necessary. And the reason I think it may not be necessary is because the process invariably will involve the Chief Justice having to appear and give evidence. So burdening her at the early stage of any, with all respect, and I'm not saying Tom, Dick, Harry to this particular petition, but I'm just saying the expression, to any Tom, Dick, and Harry making an allegation, expecting that every time the Chief Justice should be called upon to give a response, it's unnecessarily burdensome to that office, which is very busy doing all kinds of things for purposes of administration.
So you take the view from Oliver that the process is inquisitorial and not adversarial. So those that receive the process must not expect that it is the one who is making the accusation or the one to whom the accusation is against. They are the ones to litigate, but they must take the steps to confirm things for themselves.
But that's just a fact. It's just the fact of investigations. Investigations are always inquisitorial. They are not adversarial. Adversarial is judicial, but are judicial, not continental. But inquisitorial are investigations are fundamentally inquisitorial. And the reason there is because the investigative body or entity is interested in the truth. It is not interested in the evidence.
Fact finding.
So what it means is that you may not even have the evidence, but it may go for the evidence itself.
Right. So I ask it because, he mentions that I have written about this. I wrote it on the back of the fact that when I was prosecuting my case for the impeachment, we were tendering evidence that it was difficult, but we still got the evidence. And they were trying to, the lawyers for the one being petitioned, the respondent, were impeaching our evidence and asking that we didn't get it from proper custody, so it should be thrown away. And sometimes they were agreeing. So I had to insist to the committee that you are doing an inquisition. So you shouldn't expect me to provide the evidence. You, in fact, should go out there and fetch the evidence.
Our lawyers are not trained in the skill and arts of inquisitorial proceedings. Our lawyers in Ghana are fundamentally trained as adversarial lawyers. So occasionally when they interface with the inquisitorial regime, they are confused. And I'll give the example of SHRAJ as one. SHRAJ is an inquisitorial body. SHRAJ is not established to just be a neutral hearer of evidence and to decide whether a party wins or falls on his own case. However, the lawyers who appear before SHRAJ have been trained in only one skill, and that skill is adversarial. And so they bring the adversarial orientation to the inquisitorial body, and unfortunately, sometimes the inquisitorial chair people themselves are not able to direct proceedings.
So you don't think the presidency has done a good job, and is the end of the road for Prof?
No, I think on this particular matter, the presidency should have established a prima facie case. The problem is the determination of a prima facie case is fundamentally subjective. It's not, in other words, the president will have to come to a conclusion that it has established a prima facie case.
This petition should have passed the threshold of a prima facie.
It has to. That's what the law. That's what the Supreme Court together has.
So now that they say it doesn't, what should the petitioner do?
Well, the petitioner must always have the liberty of repetitioning. Yeah. But this petition is gone. It has been determined that the petition doesn't meet the threshold of a prima facie case. And that's it. Whether you agree or not with the assessment is not the issue. It's gone. You can't appeal against it.
There's no room to a court?
No, you can't appeal. The court
I have just a minute left.
The court cannot second guess.
Let's hear from you.
Oh, I think that I'll just take you from where Prof has left off. I mean, this is it for this particular one. The gate is shut completely. And I believe that Prof certainly has every opportunity to repeat his petition. You know, look, Samson, there are many coincidences that have come to play. There are also ethics within which the Chief Justice is supposed to operate. And I believe that these things have happened way too many times. So indeed, what the contents of that petitioner actually put before the president are matters that we have all been complaining about. You look at the CDD report, you look at the Afrobarometer report, you look at perceptions of the judiciary and how they work and everything. And even look at recently what happened even in the Supreme Court when this matter of the speaker was before the court. You know, I believe that there's a lot of things that happen that actually completely undermine our faith and trust in the judiciary. And
Joyce Bawa, Kweku Asare, Kofi Abochi, Oliver Bakavamawo, and Rabbi Salifu. Thank you all so very much. And of course, Alfred Chiayebwa. My outfit, as always, is by Konati Clothing. Call them 0244 676732. This has been Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. Have a good afternoon.